Great. I'd like to call this hearing to order, and I would like to welcome everybody to the November 18th Planning Commission hearing. And let me start by requesting roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos.
Here.
Commissioner Bohar.
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Here.
Commissioner McDonald.
Here.
Commissioner Wyrick.
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Here.
Chair Wellender.
Here. Okay, with that, I'd like to then move to the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to ask Mr. McDonald to lead us, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. A couple of very brief housekeeping items. One is, should our hearing go beyond 10 o'clock, and if we have an unaddressed agenda item, it will be up to the fellow commissioners on whether or not they wish to continue or to have that item continue to the next hearing. Second item is on the decisions that are made this evening. There is the right to appeal by both the applicant and anyone from the public. And you have 15 calendar days, and there are more specifics. And should you desire that, you can simply contact the planning department. With that, at this point, I'd like to welcome anybody in the public that would like to come forward and speak to any item that is not appearing on tonight's agenda. Seeing no movement, I will then bring it back. Wendy.
No, there's no one on Zoom. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Now with that, I would like to then open it up to my commissioners. You've reviewed the agenda. Would you like to accept it as written, or would you like to scramble it?
Mr. Chair, one option for you tonight to consider, that would be, because there are 4 items that are being requested to be continued, you could do those all in one fell swoop, I think, open up the hearings.
And would you please, at this time, confirm with me of those agenda items 8 through 8.6, which ones are being continued?
That'll be 8.1, 8.2, 8.5, and 8.6.
Okay. So there's one recommendation, and so do I see anybody approving or making a motion to approve and accept the agenda as modified?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call?
Commissioner Barbos.
Yes.
Commissioner Bohar.
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Yes, without a microphone.
Okay, we have got a lot of people here tonight, so if someone can turn the microphone off. Thank you. Commissioner McDonald.
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Great. Now, at this point, I would like to ask if there's any additional late correspondence.
Yes, all the late correspondence that was received has been uploaded to the document center.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to 7.1 on the consent calendar, we do have the meeting notes for the regular meeting of October 14th. And at this point, I'd like to open it up for any discussion or whether or not we can accept it as a consent item.
I move that we accept it as a consent item.
That'd be a move to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, well, yes, okay. Move to approve. Second?
I second that.
Great.
Commissioner Barbos.
Yes.
Commissioner Bohar.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald.
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Aye.
And Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Well, then we're going to do something that I don't think we've ever done before, and we're going to take 4 agenda items and we're going to mush them together with one motion to continue. So as Director Storer has mentioned, we have agenda items 8.1, 8.2, and 8.5, and 8.6. There are
Mr. Chair,
to be-
you'll need to open that up to the public as to the question of whether those items should be continued or not before you take action. You can open them all up at the same time, ask for public comment, close it, and then take an action on all of them.
Thank you for the clarity. So at this point, recognizing these 4, I'd like to invite the public if they wish to come forward. Please identify your name and welcome.
Yes, Heather Martindale. Do you need a spelling? Pardon? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it on?
You need to speak really close to the microphone. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yes, Heather Martindale. My name is Heather Martindale. I am the owner of 115 France Street. I retained a licensed surveyor to identify my legal boundary lines in preparation of a fence as a result of a bloodied intruder attempting to gain entrance into my home in the middle of the night.
Excuse me, at this point, we're just asking if anyone wants to not continue any of the items. So if you have a request to not continue one of the items, you just state that now and the Planning Commission will consider that.
I would like to have my action heard today.
And that's for item
8.2.
8.2. Thank you.
Thank you. So seeing no more movement from the audience, I'll bring it back to the commissioners for consideration and discussion about these 4 continued items.
Can we just get some
Can we get-
clarification on the continuation of 8.2 and
So what you would do is you could have a motion to continue 8.1, 8.5, and 8.6, and then we just go through the regular agenda after that. And the item that we just talked about, 8.2, will be the first that you'd consider after those 3 have been continued.
so it's an option to not continue it?
It's an option to hear it, and then you may choose to continue it or hear the item, yes.
Okay, all right.
So having heard the public on items 8.2, and it appears that the applicant is here, is there any reason we should go with the continuance or actually hear it this evening?
Well, since she's here and expressed a desire to have it heard tonight, why don't we just go ahead and keep 8.2 on the agenda and then just make a motion to continue 8.1, 8.4, and 8.6?
Any other comments regarding that?
Excuse me, that would be 8.5 and 8.6. Did you say 8.4?
I don't know. Correct me anytime.
No problem. Let's go with 8.5 and 8.6 after, and 8.1.
Okay. Then with that, I'd like, then with that revision, then we're looking at needing to have 8.1, 8.5, and 8.6 to be continued. Do I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you very much. Roll call.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Excellent. Thank you. So, okay, so at this point, we will go ahead and move on to items 8.2 as requested, and would like to have staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Prior to the preparation of the agenda, after correspondence with the appellant, We were not advised of the appellant's, or the applicant, I guess, for the appeal, of her attendance at the meeting tonight. And as such, we did not prepare a staff report or a recommendation to your commission. That forms the basis of our request for the continuation. This concludes staff's report.
Okay. Please.
Director Storr, can you clarify for us what was the issue with the timing? I saw the email and I was confused about the November 9th documents going out. What was happening?
So my first correspondence requesting about tonight's meeting, although at the initial stage I think it was set for November the 11th until the Veterans Day thing kind of moved it to the 18th. My first letter was dated in October, asking for the if she'd be available, the applicant would be in attendance, and I hadn't received any response to that. So on the 9th, I sent another letter. I've corresponded only in writing in this particular instance, and had yet to hear from the applicant about whether she could attend this meeting, recognizing that I've been balancing the ability of the applicant and the adjacent owner, Beth Harper, if she could be in attendance as well. That's not always worked out, so I was sending letters out asking for availability and hadn't heard back whether that was going to happen or not, so it was kind of trying to juggle the dates. And so tonight what we've done is recommended, I believe, going out to January of next year so that everybody can know that is the date that we expect to do the hearing. And tonight you can ask as to whether those the appellant and Beth, Mrs. Harper, could be in attendance.
On the agenda, it says that we're continuing the item to the December 9th meeting, but are you saying that it'll be January?
I'm not sure. Mine says January 13th, so I apologize.
Weird. Mine says December 9th.
Yeah, 8.2.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I really need to go to bed.
Yeah, I was going to say, okay, we had issues with the start time. It wouldn't surprise me.
Any more questions for staff regarding this item? Well, it appears that we're crippled in the sense that I cannot see moving forward in spite of the fact that the applicant has requested it, because we do not have background. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask for a motion that this item 8.2 be continued to the January date.
Move to continue to the date of January 13th, 2022.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I have a clarification before. Is there a way to be able to hear it before January 13th in the December meeting?
Not based on the complexity of the issue, no, I don't believe it is. But Mr. Chair, I would suggest that you open up the hearing, let somebody speak to the matter if they choose, but ultimately have your motion because of what we just stated.
All right, so you're back to the public. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and open it back up to the public for any comment regarding this particular item and the timing.
And Mr. Chair, if I can, just make a quick comment. I apologize. It would be customary to hear from the applicant first and then open it up to the public, or public and then let the applicant
Thank
go
you.
first.
So we have protocol or proper sequence. Please, I'd like to welcome the applicant back up to the mic.
Do I have a time limit? Or are you requesting I only speak to the timing?
Well,
Or
what's,
any commentary?
I think it would be best to speak to the timing that has been proposed here and the fact that we are not going to be in a position to move forward because of a lack of information. So it would be not fair to you to move forward without sufficient study. So I believe what we would like to hear is whether or not it would be workable for you that it be heard on January, I believe, 13th.
Yes, but if I can mention that I filed in May of earlier this year. The correspondence has been basically pigeon messenger style, and I've been open to every planning commission meeting with the exception of one, which was Veterans Day for obvious reasons. And I reject that it is publicly put in your agenda that I failed to confirm when I have an email, as I believe Commissioner O'Neill mentioned, that I had reached out to Rebecca Barr regarding my attendance here tonight and moving forward with this agenda item. So I reject that publicly being put and putting me in a bad light, that I'm not responsive. I would also like to take note that Mr. Storer has never put a deadline time frame in any of his emails, and they've been wishy-washy, and I only learned that there was a movement from the November 11th to the November 18th date through a responsive letter from Mr. Storer indicating that he had communicated with Ms. Beth Harper and her counsel, I believe her counsel, that there was a lack of attendance on her part. So I find there's not a lot of transparency. And finally, actually almost finally, additionally here, I have no idea what I am appealing other than a one sentence in a letter in the last paragraph that said it was deemed, the structure, a non-conforming legal status of which encroaches, which makes me believe that the city does not have the ability to dismiss my property rights and identify a structure as a legal conforming structure when it exists as a cited encroachment by the code enforcement. So that I am frustrated, as you can tell, with this complex movement, and I have no idea how this came to a decision, and I want to make a public request that I am requesting through the California Public Records Act that any and all documents related to the decision beyond a one sentence, 33-word sentence be given to me so I understand more what I am appealing. As of right now, is basically a snake shot for me to figure out how there was the interpretation of the code. It's very frustrating. Other elements that are of concern to me is Wayne Wyrick being involved into the decision, because not only did he formally occupy the residence at hand, he also signed off building permits through Ms. Harper, as well as he did lot line designations when they owned it, and as well as he communicated with her attorney who's present here without, unbeknownst to me. It's very frustrating, the complexity of the issue, and I want transparency on how this was approved. And one more thing I'd like to add, and I will end it here, that in review of the last 5 years of every agenda for the meetings and the items, 205 I counted, I logged, I spent all day doing it. There is not one agenda item that listed the word deny, with the exception of 8.2 addressing my appeal for November 18th, 2021. So the recommendation is to deny my appeal, and I don't think that's respectable. There's not one agenda item that says the word deny except mine. And I will close it with that.
Thank you, and let me just comment, if I could. You shared the details, and it's quite evident that for us to do a fair evaluation, it would be important for us to do our homework and an opportunity to understand the history and where we're at. So your voice has been heard.
Likewise, and I would like transparency on how this was deemed a legal and non-conforming structure since it exists on my property. I'm asking the city to provide that, other than a 33-word sentence in the last paragraph of a letter that was responding something else.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'm Richard Hicks. I live in Sonoma. I'm the attorney for Elizabeth Harper. Ms. Harper's here. I just wanted to advise the Commission we have no objection to the continuance and that we are both available on January 13th, 2022.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to step forward? All right, then I'll close the public portion. I'll bring it back to the commissioners. We have a motion. We have a second. We had comment. We've opened it up to the public. So at this point, unless I see any other movement, let's roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll see you both January 13th. All right. Now, with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and move forward to agenda item 8.3, which is seeking a use permit to allow alcohol at the restaurant Ovello, located at 248 West Napa Street. And at this point, I'd like to ask for staff's report.
Oh, before we do that, I just would like to recuse myself due to proximity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Wellender and Planning Commissioners. This is a use permit amendment to allow a restaurant at Ovello. The project is located on West Napa Street between 1st Street and 2nd Street West. There are 4 separate buildings on the property and 64 parking spaces. By way of background, in 2002, the Planning Commission approved a use permit to establish a bakery. In 2017, the Planning Commission approved a use permit modification to allow the production and sale of cured meats, charcuterie, in conjunction with the approved retail bakery. The space was remodeled to provide for an updated kitchen and food preparation area, oven, fermentation area, meat aging area, walk-in cooler, a retail counter, and a small eating area featuring 10 seats. The project was conditioned to prohibit the selling and serving of alcohol. At this time, the applicant is requesting a use permit amendment to amend the conditions of approval to allow for the sale of on-site and off-site consumption. The use permit will also allow a restaurant use on the project site, where the existing use is categorized as food and beverage manufacturing. And I would note that no physical modifications are proposed. Bakeries are considered under food and beverage manufacturing, and a restaurant allows the selling of food and beverages prepared on site. So we just wanted to point out the difference there. These are some pictures of the project site. With regard to parking, there are 64 on-site parking spaces, 11 parking spaces in excess of the parking requirements. Parking requirements for a restaurant is 1 space for every 4 seats, and 10 seats were previously authorized for the use. The applicant is not proposing to increase the allowed existing inside seating, but may wish to have more in the future. And given the excess parking on the site, staff recommends amending the use permit to allow for 5 additional outdoor seats, bringing the total to 8 outdoor seats, as 3 would be allowed without a permit because there are 10 indoor seats. And modifying the conditions to allow outdoor seating will provide flexibility in the future. So there are certain findings this commission must make in order to approve the use permit modification, and that concludes staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Yes, Mr. Burnett.
Is the applicant comfortable or in alignment with staff's recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Please. Ms. O'Neill.
Wendy, can you give us any clarity as to why the approval was conditioned upon not having the sale of alcohol?
I remember working on that staff report years ago, and as far as I can recall, it was at the direction of the previous planning director. But I don't know the reason.
Can't have been that egregious then.
Okay, with that, I will then bring it out to the public, and if anyone wishes to speak to this item, please come forward, particularly if you're the applicant, you get the first shot.
Yes, so Doreen Marino is going to be entering the meeting via Zoom to make a presentation.
Very good.
Doreen, you should be able to speak now and turn on your video if you'd like. Can you speak now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Sorry about that. Thank
Okay.
you.
That's okay. So, does anyone have any questions regarding this at all for me?
You should state your name and address for the record, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Doreen Marino, 625 Barcelona Drive, Sonoma, California, 95476.
Any questions? Mr. Barnett?
Yes, Ms. Marino, this is Larry Barnett. Staff has indicated that you are in agreement with the staff recommendation that your classification be changed to a restaurant classification. Can you confirm for us that that is the case?
Yes, I am in agreement with that. I thought it was an excellent idea.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Appears to be no more questions for the applicant,
Okay.
so thank you, and I'll now bring it back to those present in the building. Would anyone like to speak to this project? Seeing no movement, then I will bring it back to the commission, close the public portion, and bring it back to commission for discussion and possible motion.
Can I make a motion that we adopt the resolution approving the project proposed, subject to findings and conditions of approval?
I'll second that.
Discussion? Yes, Mr. Bohar.
I certainly could support that. I shop there quite a bit. I think the drinks would complement what they do, and I think there's lots of outside areas for the additional tables.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
I think it would be great to bring people a little further down the block from the plaza and get them sitting outside there enjoying some food and beverage. So I think it's a great idea and look forward to sitting out there myself.
Very good.
May I request Prosecco?
That's a conflict of interest, I believe. No. Okay. So with that, we have a motion. We have a second. May I have roll call, please?
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Bohar,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Congratulations. You
Thank you.
may go. Very good. Okay, excellent. Now, with Mr. McDonald back in seat, we will now move on to item 8.4, which is to consider approving two variances and exception application for a second-story addition for a single-family resident at 726 Edna Court. And at this point, I'd like to ask for staff's report.
Thank you, Chair Wellender and members of the Commission. Before I begin, I'd like to note that this presentation includes the revised information as presented in the staff memo uploaded to the Document Center yesterday regarding some changes to how the floor area ratio and coverage was calculated. I apologize. I made a mistake in the staff report. So the application before you tonight is actually for two exceptions. One for a two-story, one for, let me start over. Two exceptions. One for a one-story side yard setback of between 4 and 24 feet, and also a floor area ratio of 0.40. The variance is to allow a two-story side yard setback of between 4 and 24 feet to allow an 869 square foot second-story addition to a single-family residence. Back in 2013, the Planning Commission approved a waiver of the covered parking requirement to allow a daycare to operate in the converted garage. At this time, the applicants are proposing to remodel the existing residence and add an 869 square foot second-story addition to the north side of the building. The stairwell and the associated building addition would be set back between 4 and 24 feet from the north property line. Here's a picture of the site plan, and the area in question is on the north side of the property towards the street. So there's a small portion that does not comply with the side yard setbacks for both the first story and the second story. And I guess I can use my cursor here. It's this area right here that is causing the.
Can't see it.
Oh,
Where's north on this diagram?
north is
You can see the arrow just a little bit.
Yeah,
Pointing to
oh.
the right of the diagram. You see that in the bottom left? That's what that's supposed to be, is a north arrow pointing to the right.
yeah, the north is pointing to the right.
Thank you.
And this is what it would look like if the second story is approved. The proposal is consistent with the general plan, and with regard to the development code, it's consistent with the front yard and the rear yard setback. Both are 20 feet, and both of those are met. With regard to the side yard setback, a 5 foot, a minimum, and 15-foot combined side yard setback is required for one-story construction. The existing non-conforming residence is set back 5 feet from both the north and the south property lines. And the existing combined side yard setback is not met. The addition is proposed to be located between 4 feet and 23 or 24 feet from the north property line. The project does not meet this requirement, and the applicant is requesting an exception. The side yard setback for the second story requires an additional 2 feet of setback for every 5 feet in height, above 15 feet. It's required in addition to the normal requirement for one-story structure. The proposed addition is 26 feet in height, which requires an additional setback of 4.4 feet. So the required setback for a 26-foot tall structure is 9.4 feet. The second story is proposed to be located between 4 and 24 feet from the north property line. The project does not meet this requirement, and so the applicant is requesting a variance from this requirement. The project meets the requirement for site coverage, but regarding the floor area ratio, the maximum floor area ratio is 0.35. The existing FAR is 0.28, and the proposed FAR is 0.4. The project is not consistent with this requirement, and an exception is required. The project is consistent with the building height, and staff determined the design of the addition is intended to be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and employs a horizontal siding and color to match the existing residence. So the applicant has submitted a list of 15 signatures from the neighborhood supporting the project, and also 2 individual letters were received from the neighbors. As of the date of or time of the staff report, staff has not received any negative feedback about the project. So there are certain findings this commission must make in order to approve the exceptions, and there are certain variance findings that need to be made. There are special circumstances applicable to the site. The triangular shape of the property is not consistent with the standard rectangular shape typical for the city. It's got a non-conforming area of 7,000 square feet, where 7,500 square feet is the standard. The minimum lot width of 60 feet is not met on the east side of the property, and the minimum lot depth of 90 feet is not met on the south property line. And for these reasons, staff has determined an exception and the variances can be supported. So staff's recommending that this commission approve the revised resolution authorizing the variance and exception applications subject to findings and conditions of approval. Thank you.
Very good. Questions for staff? Mr. Barbos.
I have a couple. First, there were included drawings of the kitchen and a thing on the front porch. We're not dealing with any of that, are we?
That drawing was attempting to convey the existing site plan. That porch has already been constructed.
Okay. Different
sorry.
designer, I assume that was the case, but just wanted to confirm. The other thing that I noticed when I went by there to look at it today is, and looking at the map for this area, the lot to the south of this looks pretty much identical to the lot that the Buckleys have. And they have a two-story addition over their garage, which undoubtedly violates the same setback requirements. So I assume they got exceptions and variances for that.
No, they built that under a different version of the development code, but they did get a building permit for that addition.
Okay, well, it looks pretty identical to what the Buckleys are proposing, so, anyway, in terms of impact and mass, proximity to the neighbor, so forth.
Any more questions of staff? Yes, Ms. O'Neill.
I need some clarification. I remember the issue we had with the gas station and non-conforming lot and not being allowed to do anything additional to it. Does that not apply in this situation?
Well,
That's mixed use zoning.
Is that specific to the mixed use zoning, or is it, I just remember in our development code, it was a big issue that if it's a non-conforming use.
yeah,
that-
you can expand a non-conforming use. Just a moment.
It's not a use,
It's not a use. It's just a
still a residence. It's not a different use.
It still can expand it? If it's
Yeah,
non-conforming?
because it's not a different use. We have no lawyer.
Well, the degree of nonconformity was in the combined side yard setbacks. So if this commission desires, we could go back and do a use permit to expand a nonconforming use.
Is the nonconformity being expended or is it being maintained?
Maintained.
Yeah, we can do that you can keep or retain the degree of nonconformity as long as you don't increase the degree of nonconformity. So, in other words, that distance has already been not deemed nonconforming. You can keep it at that as long as you don't go even further.
Does that make sense? You want me to
I'll
expand?
keep listening. I'm a little confused because, and I can't find it in my notes, but I remember that non-conforming, that no expansion was allowed, and that's what I'm confused about.
That is the case. The doctrine that I'm referring to is not in our development code, and this is a situation where are you expanding the intensity or are you expanding the thing that's in nonconformity? And we can return with a legal opinion on that if you'd like, because that's where I've dealt with this particular issue before in my career. If you're not increasing the degree of nonconformity by getting closer to a setback and things like that.
Do we have to complicate things and pursue a revised use permit, or can we just simply proceed with the action tonight based upon the fact that there is no expansion of
I feel uncomfortable working off the fly here, but I mean, my first thought would be to continue the item to address the question. We don't have legal counsel here tonight, which could probably answer the question. But, you know, is it 1982, Wendy, where we talk about non-conforming uses? I think it is. There are things that I think that Commissioner O'Neill is talking about there. But under our, my experience has been, as I've stated, the worst case scenario would be that we would get a use permit and revise the application.
And in this particular case, if we choose to continue it, is this something that can be continued to the December hearing and not dumped into the new year?
That's correct, yeah, and I, obviously, based on what we've heard from Commissioner Barbosa, I'd want to go take a look at the other structure too, because I've got to try to figure out how that got there too.
Help me understand, because isn't there,
I'm really confused. My understanding of legal non-conforming use has to do with the use of the property,
correct?
not the structure. So if a structure has previously been approved, it's not a legal non-conforming use, it's just a structure that was previously granted a variance. That doesn't mean it fits within my understanding of what a legal non-conforming use is, such as the gas station on Broadway that wanted to have a restaurant and all these other things, which are clearly different uses. So I think we're kind of going way overboard on this, and we could just pass it with the 2 variances and the exception, and not make these poor people come back again, as seemingly everything on our agenda has to go to a different meeting. It'd be nice to just get something done.
Well, I think you're correct. I'm looking at it now. We are in 1982. There is a difference between a non-conforming structure and a non-conforming
Just a
use.
second.
This is not a use question like Commissioner Barbosa just mentioned. This is a non-conforming structure, and we do have the ability to say that that we're not expanding here, we're maintaining.
So in English language, we can proceed?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, did you have more questions?
No, I think we've clarified it enough. I just wanted to make sure that we did.
Mr. Barnett?
Was one of the letters in support of this from the neighbor directly to
South.
the northeast?
No, it wasn't. And it's my understanding that the applicant did try on a number of times to reach out to that neighbor with no success.
Okay, thank you.
I know the owner's here, but then, yes.
Oh,
Okay, let's bring it back here. So we've had comments to staff. Anything else? So with that, now at this point, I'd like to welcome the applicant to come forward if they so desire and to speak to this project. And please state your name and
So my name is Shawn Buckly, and this is my wife Rachel. We're the homeowners. Forgive me, I'm not like a public speaker, so this might go good
No
or
problem.
not.
just make sure you speak really close into the
Yeah,
microphone.
sorry.
Thank you.
We have like a little opening letter essentially, and that's what we've got currently, and then if you have any questions or whatever. So anyways, good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here. My name is Shawn Buckly, and my wife Rachel and I live on 726 Eda Court. We are here tonight in hopes to receive support and approval for our remodel addition proposal. We understand that what we are asking for does not fit within standard building code requirements, but we believe that the reasons stated in our submission application that the variance and exceptions are reasonable. Rachel and I both grew up here in Sonoma, and throughout the years we have seen many of our friends and family move away into towns, states, and other countries. One thing that Rachel and I have always agreed upon was to stay here, raise a family in our hometown, and create a forever home for us, and eventually pass along to our children, Anthony and Landon. We feel very lucky and fortunate to have been able to buy a house here in Sonoma. When we first purchased our home years ago, our first remodel project, where we took away one of our existing bedrooms to create a living space, as our home was very small, including our kitchen and living room area. We always knew that we wanted to add a 4th bedroom back in the future when we could afford to do so. The reason we are applying for the exception and variance is because unfortunately what we are asking for does not fit into the FAR percentage standards and new side setback requirements. A couple of reasons why we're seeking the square footage is in order to add a staircase at the end of the hall, as we have to take from both existing closets from our back 2 bedrooms in order to do this. Our bedrooms will need closets, especially with my family, since we have very limited storage currently. Our hope is not to take away from any of our existing living space and to add closets back to the floor plan in the meantime giving us extra space for an upstairs closet. We also currently rent a large 20 by 20 storage unit at mall self-storage just to hold our excess stuff, along with Christmas decorations that we spend much time during the holidays decorating our home for the enjoyment of the children and families in our community. If you don't already know, we are the Sonoma Christmas House. We understand it is not a requirement to have your neighbor's approval, but it was important to us to seek out how they felt about it. So we decided to go door to door and raise awareness and to answer any questions they may have. We were really overwhelmed with all the love and support that we received. Knowing that we have the support of our neighbors was essential. We really hope that you can agree that what we are asking for is reasonable based on items stated in the submission letter and ultimately grant us approval. We love Sonoma and consider this our forever home. We also love our community and look forward to seeing it grow, and we're trying to grow along with it. Thank you again for your time and consideration. We look forward to hopefully putting on an even bigger Christmas display. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the applicant from the commission? Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And would anyone else like to come forward and speak? And please identify yourself. And
my name is Joe Cuneo. I live at 711 Level Valley Road. Oh man, it's a great letter. I'm the owner of 720 Ida Court, which is the house to the northeast. It shares the northern property line. I think these guys are amazing. I think what they do with the Christmas lights, the Halloween decorations, they're an asset to the community. They do childcare. I mean, that's something we don't have enough of and we need more of. So I just want to go on record. I'm in full support of what they're trying to do. I think it looks great. I think it's in kind of, I don't know, it kind of fits with the Bay House, whatever that was, 759 or 49, the house to the south. I think it looks great. And yeah, just super happy for them. I think this is the future of that neighborhood. Whether we all want to come to grips with it, it seems like with SB9, we're kind of want to put more restrictions on things, but I think that neighborhood, it's still a walkable neighborhood. There's a lot of grocery stores, coffee shops. Stuff's going to go up, and it's going to be maybe uncomfortable, but I think that's kind of the future of that neighborhood is more density and more in-law units and more boomerang kid units, which they'll probably, hopefully not have, but odds are they will. And it's like good for them for doing it. So I'm happy for them. I hope you guys approve what they're trying to do. I think they're good people. They're an asset to the community. Everybody loves them. And yeah, that's all I need to say. I still have 3 minutes. Can I keep going?
I didn't start it because you're special.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commissioners for discussion and possible motion. Mr. Barbos.
Well, given the odd shape of this lot, and the fact that the part that is not in compliance in terms of the side yard setback is such a small little area where the point of the house comes nearest to the property line on the north side, I am in favor of granting the two variances and the exceptions requested, two exceptions and one variance, and think that I'm not trying to create problems to people to the south, but they then have what their neighbor to the south has, which seems to fit and work nicely in the neighborhood. That was my point earlier, not to try to get the neighbor to the south in trouble. It was quite the reverse. But anyway, I'm totally for this and urge my fellow commissioners to approve it.
Mr. Barnett.
I concur.
Ms. O'Neill.
I want to support this. I haven't seen your Christmas lights, but I'll definitely try and go by. But I'm reading 19.82.020, restrictions on non-conforming uses and structures. Non-conformities may be continued subject to the following provisions. Non-conforming use of land or within a structure shall not be enlarged, increased, or extended to occupy a greater floor area or portion of the site than it lawfully occupied before the non-conforming use. I'm stuck on that.
That's regarding a non-conforming use.
And
The use-
structure. It says non-conforming uses and structures.
Or
within.
within a structure. So this is residential going to residential. That's the you can't go from residential to commercial or switching around. It's the non-conforming structure piece that we're talking about.
Okay. My brain is trying to absorb that, but as much as I want to support this, I I don't want to give different rules to different people, and I'm struggling with that. Like, why could we do it here and we couldn't do it for the, the previous projects? So I
Yeah,
need help with
because,
that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just got really excited. So I think you're referring to the gas station on Broadway, and they were proposing to expand the use. In addition to the gas station, they wanted to add a restaurant. So that's the use. This is, they have a single family residence, and it's going to be continued to be used as
Is
a
a
single.
residence not a structure?
The residence
It's a
is
residential use.
resident.
It's not the resident structure, it's the use.
So what they're saying in this 19.82.020 is that it's the restrictions on the non-conforming uses and structures. So it's not uses and structures. It's, you got to be both.
It's a use within a structure.
All right.
I haven't got my booster, but it made sense. So, any more comments? Would anyone care to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the exceptions and variances as set forth by staff report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'd like to ask a roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Bohar,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Yes.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 7-0.
Good luck.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
could I request a 5-minute
Oh, I was
break?
gonna, we are simpatico. We are gonna do that. We'll take a break until 8 o'clock, well, 7 o'clock, real time, 8 o'clock on that unadjusted clock. the director can speak up and correct me, but the goal this evening is to give definitive feedback to staff so that they continue on refinement of developing objective design standards for single-family housing as a result of SB9. So that is a fairly focused discussion, but at the same time, I also want to recognize that we are going to continue to be creating objective standards for the other areas down the road thanks to SB 330. So it's kind of in that spirit that I'm hoping this will just get us started. And I want to recognize that we have a good contingency of design professionals in the audience, for which I appreciate them being here. And I am biased, and I will confess it right in front of everybody that my goal is that we create objective standards addressing things of our real concern to protect our community. But I would like to caution and or try to minimize the tendency to want to tie the hands of the design professionals. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our planning director, Mr. Storm. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. The first slide I wanted to put on here, clearly, this is related to SB9 only because of that new bill that was passed and comes into effect on January the 1st of this next year. And thank you for connecting the dots on SB 330 because that's one thing that we haven't done when that gun was placed to our head, if you will, back in the day, that now we're seeing communities throughout California adopting guidelines for multifamily, and we can benefit from that. And I can report that in working with the City Council Ad Hoc Committee on the Development Code Update, that they have asked Christina and I to provide them with some sample material so that perhaps there's an opportunity to merge the two, the single family with the multifamily. Now, again, remember that SB9 is has a new deadline, whereas the SB 330 on the multifamily does not. But I think it's a good idea to try to merge those two together. The plan, as you'll see in my presentation, is to provide your commission tonight with some material, and we'll talk about that. I have a presentation on SB9 specifically, and I'll admit that I think every day I'm learning less about SB9. My brain is going to mush. I feel like I'm not perfect in SB9. I'm learning more. Even today on another webinar, I'm learning more and different perspectives of how to view some of the pieces. And I could show you some correspondence from attorneys asking questions about the provisions of this, including how to separate the components of one piece versus the components of the other. When I talk about that, you'll see it in a minute as to how SB9 is broken down. So with that, I guess the major point here is that we can, when I say we, cities and counties can adopt ordinances to implement the provisions of SB9. And again, it's the goal tonight to receive your input such that staff can then put that into a draft ordinance for your next meeting, and then provide at that meeting a recommendation to the city councils so that they could adopt an urgency ordinance and or a regular ordinance on December 15th, I think it is. So the plan tonight will be to talk about how the city of Sonoma chooses or wants to address SB9 with respect to two things. Number one is the ability to put two homes on an existing lot versus the second component, and that is the subdivision of lots into urban lot splits. So again, as I mentioned, council members Barnett and Felder gave us direction to prepare and anticipate preparing an urgency ordinance so that we could have our own objective design standards. And again, we hope to introduce those items on December 15th. The important thing to remember is the urgency ordinance will go into effect immediately, and the regular could trail and then become effective, and it would replace the urgency. So that way we've got something on the books, whatever it is we as a commission want to present to the council as a recommendation. I'm going to try to talk about the key points of SB9. These are the two components in the citations in the law. One talks about adding more units to a property at an existing single-family lot and throughout your city. The two talks about an actual amendment to the State Subdivision Map Act, something that I thought was quite interesting. The reason I've struck out, or stricken, I'm not sure what the word is, Section 3 is we won't be talking about that tonight. It just talks about how you extend maps and those kind of things relative to the Map Act. You can always tell a Map Act citation when you see the 66,000 number. So there are two basic things that I said where no more than 2 residential units can be on a single parcel within a single-family residential zone, and they have to be approved ministerially. And I'll just explain what ministerial versus discretionary is. That's the only two types of permits you can get in California. One where there's some subjective judgment. For example, tonight we had a great case of do we or don't we approve a variance or exceptions. You can say yes, you can say no, or you can say yes with conditions. When it comes to a ministerial act, that will be like the building official issuing a building permit, because you can build a house on a vacant lot in a single family zone. And typically what the building official will do is he'll receive that application and he'll look to see if X, Y, and Z are satisfied, and it could be Title 24 things, or it could be setbacks, in which case that project will be sent to the planners, and the planners will say, does that house meet the 4-foot setback or the 10-foot setback? Is it too high? Those kind of things, and we sign off on it, it goes on its way. It doesn't go to any political body like the Planning Commission or the City Council. It's a staff function. So that's what SB9 is doing, is saying no more public hearings for a single family home or a 2-lot subdivision, as is the second case that you see there. It's now saying, and I've got that same slide that I used about a month ago, and I'll go through that a little bit later in the presentation. But this will require a ministerial approval of a subdivision of 2 lots, or in one parcel into 2 lots. So here's our government code. I'm not going to read all of these things here because tonight I'm not trying to focus on everything that SB9 says, but there are things that have to be approved unless it has to be approved if it meets all of these kind of things. And I've highlighted in yellow, we're talking about demolition, impacting affordable housing. We're talking about demolition of units if somebody's lived there. We're talking about Ellis Act. That's where you have a property that's kind of required to be affordable housing and it's taken out. We're looking at a certain amount of demolition on exterior walls. Tenants also being in there. Provisions about whether the property is in a historic district. And then the last one, there's 10 locational issues where it must not be located in those certain areas. We're nowhere near an Alquist Priolo earthquake fault that I'm aware of, but we may have very high fire hazard areas nearby. But this is also a place where SB9 will not be applicable. Then we start to get into the actual technical pieces. We are allowed to, again, impose objective zoning standards, objective subdivision standards, and objective design review. And that's the point of the discussion this evening, is to talk about what Sonoma wants to do other than just a setback kind of an issue. Those setbacks are objective, they're numbers, they're measurable. I can't change the setbacks. Our building official can't change those setbacks. He can determine that maybe a setback is not being made, sends it to staff. We come to the Planning Commission that would exercise discretion. And we can exercise or impose objective zoning standards, but we cannot preclude up to 2 units, and we cannot have them be less than 800 square feet. The law allows 800 square feet. So when it comes to those objective standards, it says here we can adopt those specific standards in an ordinance, as long as there's, and we must make sure there's no personal or subjective judgment by a public official. That would be ourselves. There's also a provision in there that talks about rental units. Again, I've repeated the one there about the 800 square feet. That seems to be a big thing, as you see it, not only in the ability to develop an existing parcel, but also in the parcels where you split and create two from one. There's also prescriptive standards in there about parking for off streets. And basically, you may require off-street parking go up to one space. That means you can require 0. But you can't require off-street parking if it's within a half-mile of a high-quality transit corridor, or half-mile walking distance to a major transit stop, or that there's a car vehicle share program vehicle within a block. You can also get into the world of trying to figure out how many ADUs and JDUs on there. Again, that's not the purpose of tonight's discussion, but to get to objective design standards. You can also see here that you can have, you can go down to 4 feet on your side yards. In our city, as I mentioned previously, and I'll repeat it just for a moment, there are 5 residential zoning districts in our city where single-family residences are allowed by right. And we can also, obviously, as I've stated before, we can have ADUs and JEDUs in there. Question I'm often asked is how many SB9 lots are we talking about when it comes to adding objective design standards into our zoning or development code. And you may recall that I talked about the Turner study. They were saying that there's about 5% of all of the parcels throughout the state of California they think could be able to be done. Now, whether that number gets done is another issue, because people may choose not to have a house that could, if they went through the development process, get a subdivision, and they just maybe don't want to be landlords. So I think if you look at 205 parcels, let's say every one of them wanted to do it, that's a lot of houses. I don't think it's going to be that way. I'm kind of looking at the issue of SB9 lots and development being created because of the statute. I understand where the legislature was going. I look at them as being the output of like ADUs, and I think when I've asked Wendy about ADUs, I think the high we've done is about 12 in a year, something like that, and I think even under SB9 that might be too aggressive. That's 1 a month, and I just can't see that coming, but we need to be ready in case it does. And at this point right now, if a home comes in without any objective design standards other than setbacks, simply in a block form, if you will, as far as the mass in the building structure like that, we will get routed that plan, and all we'll be doing is looking at setbacks. Does it comply with the setbacks in one of these 5 zones? Does it meet the floor area ratio, lot coverage, and height restriction? That'll be it. So there's nothing else there about graduating the height per se in a ministerial permit. There isn't discretionary, we get to do that, but that'll be a part that we need to look at. With respect to urban lot splits, again, as I mentioned, this is a case where the Subdivision Map Act was actually modified by the legislature and basically said cities and counties, parcel maps are the way to go. This is how we're going to create these new lots. So if you have a lot that is able to be subdivided based on the zoning, minimum zoning sizes and things of that nature, it's going to be allowed ministerially. And this is just a definition of what objective standards are. You've just seen that a few minutes ago. And again, even under the MAP Act and the subdivision process, the local standards that we have cannot prohibit 2 800 square foot units per lot that you've just created in a single family zone. And we've got to have at least 1,200 square feet. So again, it mandates housing development to be considered ministerially. I can't get over that. I can't emphasize that enough, that there's a clear difference there. And when we establish the interim ordinance, when we establish the regular ordinance, these projects are exempt from CEQA. There is no CEQA for these things. So if I can just spend half a second here on what this really means. So if you look on the left-hand side, you can see discretionary planning commission and city council. So today as we speak, if somebody wants to come in with 3 and 4 lots, or 2 lots, that's a tentative parcel map, and CEQA is required. You may recall that we do projects and give categorical exemptions for those things if they fit. And the resultant act after that, once one gets one approved, then they go into the right side of the equation here where it says ministerial. And a tentative parcel map will go to the city engineer and it will go to the city council. There's no CEQA at that point because we've done it previously. In a subdivision like a Mockingbird, for example, you'll see that that went to a tentative subdivision map that was secret performed, and then it went to a final map at the city council and with improvement plans and the like, and the city engineer then gets it to be recorded. That is a ministerial act. It's the question the engineer asks themselves is, does this final map substantially comply with the approved tentative? And if the answer is yes, then it goes, there's no discretion to say, change my mind, I don't want to approve this. That's not an act that the council can take. What SB9 does is says, you know what, folks, for two-family, a subdivision into 2 lots, it doesn't go through any of that stuff on the left-hand side. It goes straight to the city engineer who says, are there 2 lots? Yes. Well, great. Does it conform, planners? They'll send it to the planners and say, does it comply with the zoning standards that are prescribed there that are measurable? And we don't get to exercise any discretion. It either does or it doesn't. That's the act that we need to take as a staff. That's what will happen on January the 1st, unless there's more questions for us to ask when we go through that process. Right now, we're limited to setbacks, height, and things that I've just mentioned. So I think this is about the last slide, maybe. Some of our existing objective standards are heights of 30 feet, maximum heights. We've got distances to creeks and top of banks. We've got retaining wall kind of things. And as I've said, site coverage, floor area, setbacks, and height. If we don't like the numbers that we have now, let's change them so that we can get what we want or prevent what we don't want through acting through objective standards, which we clearly have the authority to do so. So what we have done is we've not given you what we think must be obeyed, so to speak. We've given you a kitchen sink approach that we wanted to kind of give you some things that are out there for you to look at and determine what you and your mind believe are those things that are best for the city. You've lived here a lot longer than any of us, and we're not the pros. We can kind of give you the information, and we as staff are not going to be offended at all about how you kind of expand it or shrink the things that are provided to you. So we are, again, just asking for a recommendation from you tonight to staff so that we can go ahead and finesse a possible ordinance of things that you think are appropriate for the community so that they can then take an action, take your recommendation on the 15th and consider that when they consider adopting an urgency ordinance. This concludes staff's report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
Go ahead and turn it off.
Any questions of staff before we open it up to the public? Mr. McDonald.
I just, with respect to the subdivision, could you clarify the difference between a map, a regular map where you're creating individual lots and condoization of buildings, and also in instances where there's something recorded for like a tenant, like a TIC, a tenant in common, where there's one property and then individual units are condoized in common spaces. Does this apply to condo maps and TICs?
So there is no such thing as a condo map. It's within the structure that I just mentioned. So when you have a tentative subdivision map of more than 5, it's always going to be a final map. It's just how they're dimensioned and how they're sold off. That's the principal difference. But the same left to right side of the discretionary versus ministerial.
Is there a distinguishment in our subdivision code with respect to creating a map that creates like a condo type development versus our planned development versus a standard subdivision where just there's a lot split or there's 3 lots created?
Yes, an engineer would actually make that distinction on the map, and it's, we actually have an application that we're working on now. I think you're working on that, aren't you, Wendy? Where it's still a tentative subdivision map, but they've dimensioned the property. It usually stays as one property, and then they carve out within that property where the actual airspace is. But it's still the principle of discretion, still the principle of does it comply before you actually do it, go ahead and record so you can get those condos created.
Right. So my understanding would be you could create airspace and condo-like developments as a ministerial act under this new Senate bill.
I don't know. I really don't know.
That's my question.
Well, I'll find out and we'll get back to you. The point is, again, I think I'm at a 6.5 out of a 10 on this SB9, to be honest with you. And I think that's one of the questions. I'm happy. In fact, I spoke with legal counsel today, And any question that you ask that I'm not able to answer, we'll get that list of questions to counsel, legal counsel. And
Yeah,
we'll
because
provide it.
my suggestion would be if there is a distinguishment, then we should have a distinguishment in our subdivision code. So we can tackle those in a different way if the planning commission and the city council believe so.
So the question would be, if I can frame it for you, with an urban lot split, can they be condoed? Okay. My gut reaction is the answer is yes, but let me get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Barnett?
In SB9, there's a provision that the homeowner wishing to do a lot split needs to sign an affidavit declaring that they will or intend to occupy, and it's unclear to me which home or which parcel or which lot that would occupy for a minimum of 3 years. My question, and I think these will be questions for the city attorney as well, what is the definition of a homeowner? Because clearly an LLC can purchase a home with 8 shareholders, and any one of those shareholders could be deemed a homeowner as part of being part of the LLC. And for that matter, the other question I've got is what would the city consider requiring from someone who submits an affidavit, which is to say, would it be legal for the city to require that the definition of a homeowner be tighter, which is to say that there's evidence produced that through, for example, a tax return, that this residence is going to be declared as the primary residence of that owner, as opposed to just being an owner of a property. So I'm concerned about the definition of homeowner. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
I'm just going to look it up right now. You can continue on with the discussion. I recall the affidavit question coming up a lot about, is it worth the piece of paper that it's written on, because they can go into either one of those 2 homes, I think. And then the question is, later on, there's provisions in SB9 that talk about, well, you can't do an urban lot split if one's been done before, and you've got to have neighbors next door. You can't do next door and all that kind of stuff. There's some really funky language in there.
No, and the other question is, in a municipality like Sonoma, I don't know what would be required or possible in terms of verification of the validity of that affidavit over time. I mean, are we going to go in and physically inspect and knock on the door, or require a yearly verification of occupancy? And I mean, it seems to me to be a monitoring nightmare.
So the statute reads like this, Commissioner Barnett. A local agency shall require an applicant for an urban lot split to sign an affidavit stating that the applicant intends. That's the problem that everybody has. Not the fact that an affidavit, we can create those all day long. But they intend to occupy one of the 2 housing units as their principal residence for a minimum of 3 years from the date of the approval of the urban lot split. So the day that the city engineer takes it to record, that's when the 3-year clock starts. And as long as they intend to do it, by golly.
Well, so all it requires is intention. It doesn't mean actual. And then, of course, it also raises the issue of what happens after 3 years. At that point, the property obviously reverts to a free-for-all status, and it can be sold, and anybody can live there, I assume. But once again, that's a further question.
Can I just offer an idea as we try to deal with establishing home ownership? I believe our city attorney would allow us to require filing of a deed restriction on the title when the subdivision map occurs that would at least restrict that deed for 3 years to that homeowner. And so that could be part of the recordation of the map. So I think that the city engineer can at least require a restriction for 3 years.
Well, we clearly have to. It was mandatory there. It says the word shall. The other thing too is, learned today that HOAs have the, what's the word? They have the ability to prohibit this SB9 stuff. Sorry, that's where I can say it. So if there's an HOA prescription to say you can't do a split, that will prevail under the court. It's typically the opposite way around. So go figure. We have to do that. We have to kind of monitor that as well, because there may when and I actually don't know how we can check that, because that means we're now getting into the HOA's ability to limit. And that was as of about 11:30 today that I watched that, heard that.
Ms. O'Neill.
It's no different in the lending world. When you get a mortgage as an owner occupied, you sign that form, you shall sign that form that says, I intend to occupy this property as my primary residence for 12 months. There is no way to follow up. And also, intents can change. There could be health issues, there could be financial issues, there could be divorce. There's no way for us to expect that to go forward and have a way to monitor it. But I do wonder about the piece, I believe it says that it has to be owner occupied for 3 years prior to the lot split.
I don't recall seeing that.
No?
To be honest with
Okay.
you, yeah.
Darn, okay. But yeah, going forward, other than making them sign that document, and nobody's gonna hold them accountable.
Lovely. Okay. Anything else? All right, seeing no movement, then I would like to then open it up to the public, and I'm going to be a little bit generous in that I'd like to stick to maybe the 3-minute rule, but you can rotate, come back a second and a third time. So you have plenty of opportunity to give input, because we all recognize that this is important and we want a rich discussion. So draw straws, arm wrestle, I don't care. Somebody come forward.
You can go ahead and pull that up. Yeah, that'd be great, because I'll get to it. Good evening, Chair Wellender, members of the commission. Bill Willers, H73 First Street West. I think that the primary, given the shortness of time that you have to deal with this, given the January 1 deadline, I think the primary impact of SB9 on single-family zoning is the potential impact of the creation of multiple units on a single-family lot and the mass that that will create on properties that are relatively small and have been subdivided down through the history of subdivision in the city of Sonoma. We don't have that many large lots here that when you subdivide them will meet the FAR that is on the base underlying zone. You know, most of the low density residential lots have an FAR of 0.35. Well, as an example of that, a 7,500 square foot lot, which is the minimum lot in the low density residential district, would allow a 2,600 square foot house. Well, if you use 4 800 square foot minimum units, you're already at 32. So you're already exceeding the FAR of a single family residence on that single family minimum lot size. Then SB9 allows you to subdivide that, cut it in half, and that further impact not only the FAR, basically, but also impact the coverage, because along with the additional units come additional cars. Additional cars require additional circulation. All of that adds up to additional coverage, site coverage ultimately as well. Then SB9 allows you to get within 4 feet of the 4 feet of the property line with a 4-foot setback. And I believe that SB9 says that you can't modify that, which means that if you're going to build a 2-story structure, that gets to get to 4 feet as well. And so the only limitations I think that are the meat of the the meat here, and not the potatoes, are those zoning restrictions. I think that the commission needs to set zoning rules to operate within the bubble of that 4-foot bubble of space. That's 20 feet off the front, 4 feet to the rear, 4 feet to the sides, and that's where, under SB9, everyone can operate. And in order to fit your units on the property, you gotta, because you're gonna max out the site, you gotta push it to the edges. So that's the potential. That's the potential problem. The other thing is, how many of these are gonna happen? Probably not very many, as everyone has basically said. But some will. And I think the job of the Planning Commission is to essentially protect the welfare of this community that way. And then lastly, protect the vested interests of the neighbors in that community by limiting the square footage of the units to that maximum size of 800 square feet. That's the only way. Only until you get to 11,500 square foot lot do you begin to come equal to the FAR that would be allowed on that lot. So that's just the start. But I think also in SB9 there's a lot of may, the local jurisdiction may. Every time that the local jurisdiction may, you should. You should take the advantage of that legislation and say no ADUs on these properties, a maximum of 2 units. There's a lot of those mays in this language, and every time you're given the opportunity to make law under this law, you should take that opportunity. I'll follow up with a little bit more because I do have
Great.
diagrams that I submitted.
Could I adjust, would you switch it to 5 minutes, not 3? I don't want this,
Okay.
so you can come,
So
come
let's
back.
put up the graphics because I did a little
Okay.
sketch problem here. I took a 7,500 square foot lot. I took 4 800 square foot units, and I placed them on that lot under what SB9 would allow me to do. What you see at the top is 2 colors, a red and a blue inside, which turns purple. But the red is actually the allowable building envelope under SB9. The blue is the kind of ziggurat that our current base zoning in low-density residential allows. So that gives you the envelope of what SB9 allows, and it gives you the envelope of what you could build if you do a discretionary building. Now remember, we can always do duplexes on single-family lots, only with a use permit though. And under that use permit, you would be required to meet the prescriptive standards of the development code, that ziggurat-shaped blue thing that you see in there. Under SB9, you don't. So what you see in the red that's in the slide below are 4 800 square foot units, stacked as 2-story units, 800 square feet of covered parking, 1 space per unit, 200 square feet per space, and the necessary site circulation to get to that. What we've done in the standards that I kind of outlined in our hypothetical standards is we allowed those parking structures to join at the common property line as a 0 lot line to incentivize actually the parking to come into the middle of the property rather than to hang around at the edges. But that shows you the kind of proximity and ability even of those small units to impact the property owners to either side or to the back of that property. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. If you go, can you slip to the next page? I forget what we've got here completely. This just kind of shows it as a site plan generation. And honestly, the one that's at the top of the page or the rear of the lot is set back beyond that because I joined it to the building, but it could slip to 4 feet to the rear setback as well. So stop.
And Bill, if you don't mind, not a question, it's what we talked about earlier. There is, we have discretion to not require parking as well. In this case, Bill provided it because of a perceived need that we do. And that's why it was joined at the lot line there. I guess that's at the midpoint of the 45 there, Bill?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think there's an interesting point that I just didn't get around. There's a lot in this that obviously is complicated. And I've spent an entire week now thinking about this because it kind of agitates me and I like thinking about these things. Carol and I started at the base zoning requirements and said, why should the SB9 applicant have more beyond what the state allows it to have, more than the base zoning allows? And at every turn, we tried to restrict the way in which you could use the SB9 parcels to accommodate similarity to the base zone. So single-family houses are required to have one covered parking place. Let's require every unit that's produced on an SB9 parcel to have one covered parking place. That's kind of equity. The FAR, how the FAR changes with the site size, let's say it's 800 square foot maximum until you reach the FAR. And once you get to an FAR that's greater, that would allow more square footage, then you're in equity with the single family zone. We're not trying to say no, no, no to SB9. We're just trying to bring it more into compatibility with the neighborhoods that this is going to be possibly be placed in. And I think the ADU issue is a big issue. I think if someone produces an ADU on their property and then decides to go forward with a SB9 lot split, that they've already got 2 units, that's it, they're done. And the city can restrict the SB9 parcels to a maximum of 2 units each.
And that's whether one is a single-family home or an ADU.
Right.
So you get to pick, but you only get the 2.
Yeah, but you only get 2. And then also, what's important to remember in all of this is that everyone talks about rental units, but the reality of this is that they're allowed to be separately conveyed. In real estate terms, that means sold. So each one of these units is a unit for sale. And there is nothing in SB9 that requires you to produce 2 units. It says that you may produce 2 units. So an SB9 parcel can be subdivided into 2 parcels, having 2 single-family houses on it, but suddenly it has 4-foot setbacks. So that's something to really remember about this. Another reason for limiting the size of the potential unit on the property under SB9 parcel splits, under the ministerial process.
Thank you.
My name is Robert Bauman. I'm an architect here in Sonoma. My home address, 839 Cordilleras Drive, Sonoma 95476. I agree with everything Bill said. I didn't take as deep of a dive into the big picture of zoning in FAR and what that means in a potential development, but I do have some comments about the objective criteria and this process in general. I think it would be an unreversible mistake to mandate all residential structures to look similar, and I think that's what these objective guidelines are starting to do. Sonoma's charm and desirability as a place to live is due in large part to the variation of styles. You cannot reduce the many characteristics that make each of these styles such prized pieces of Sonoma's architectural fabric down to a list of common elements. The guidelines should allow design freedom for owners and designers to continue adding to the unique appearance of the many wonderful homes in this town. And instead of objective design standards, the ministerial review process should simply enforce the current restrictions of size, including FAR and coverage, height limits, and setbacks. And if I understand what you explained, Mr. Storer, that those would all be in place, and meaning height limits and the current setbacks and current things, that we have the ability to still keep them, to preserve them, FAR and coverage requirements, from what you said earlier. Is that correct? Okay, got it, yeah. One thing that I saw in these objective guidelines that I think should be really considered. On every project, there's typically a designer or architect, civil engineer, and structural engineer, and oftentimes geotechnical and energy consultants. In addition to these guidelines would now require an arborist, a lighting designer, a landscape designer, biologist. This is all at huge costs to project applicants. I think the majority of the guidelines do not account for differences in owner programs and site conditions. So many projects, all projects, vary greatly. Getting into specifics of the standards that I read, I'm not going to comment on every one of them, but I've got a few that I think are important to make note of. Masking and articulation, point A. Incorporate dormer windows at the upper stories. There are many styles that adding dormers to a structure doesn't make any sense. Masking articulation B. A lot of that is already, this is what, two-story structures adjacent to single-story structure, residential structures shall use a minimum of one of the following techniques to reduce appearance height. A lot of this is already covered in the development code. Why make it more stringent? It adds to structural cost on a lot of these things. And again, it goes back to my question about what your ability is to keep the guidelines that we currently have and not impose more restrictive guidelines on those kinds of zoning limitations. Under masking articulation C, residences shall have roof pitch between 412 and 1112. You're basically eliminating flat roofs. Why? What's the point of that? And under D, single-story residences shall be no taller than 18 feet. Two-story residences shall be no taller than 25 feet. Again, why? That's already covered in the guidelines for height limit and other restrictions that are already in the development code. Under F, a minimum of 2 features such as balconies, cantilever dormers, bay windows shall be incorporated in each project building. Requiring a minimum number of any design feature is baseless. It makes no sense to force an applicant to put something on their house that doesn't go with that style or they don't want. Only a couple more here. Under L, the height of the new dwelling unit shall not be greater in height than the existing dwelling unit. Does that mean no more second-story additions? The project applicant that was here earlier, if this was passed and that happened to be a project that was part of the SB9, you could no longer put a second-story addition on something. And again, I don't have as thorough of an understanding of SB9, and maybe that's explained once I read it in more detail, but at cursory glance, it seems like that's what it's saying, or at least these objective guidelines are saying. I don't think that it makes sense to have, under historic preservation, residences over 50 years old shall submit an HRE. So that now is any house built before 1972 has to get an HRE. I think that's excessive. The limitations on grading and site work, if I understand this correctly, between the rainy season and the nesting bird protection, there's 1 month out of the year when a builder can do site work. Just because how those months, nesting season is in the spring and summer, rainy season is wintertime. Basically, the month of September is when you can do site work. Doesn't make any sense. Well, I've got others, but I'm over my time. I'll give the floor and come back.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Michael Ross, 245 Patton Street, Sonoma, architect. So I reviewed SB9 and believe Sonoma should prepare appropriate objective design standards for SB9 developments only, and not apply them uniformly across all single-family zones in the city. I think it's the one way that we can reestablish some sort of local control over our design destiny here in our residential neighborhoods in light of SB9's legal language, and we should take every advantage doing so. But while we do it, even though it appears that we're doing it in utter haste, that we're getting close to a deadline here, I think we need to take an aspirational look of what our guiding principle is as we write these guidelines. And I believe for me, the guiding principle would be that SB9 projects should be compatible with our existing neighborhood's context and character. And before we go into the quantifiable realm, we need to agree as a group, as we draft these, that there's some guiding principle that we're trying to meet as we draft these. And in that case, there may be two tiers of guidelines. Tier 1, which would be for non-SB9 development, which is basically our current development code, the Design Review Commission, subjective decisions around design and the historic overlay, of course, and then this specific set of design documents, which is going to be for SB9 projects. And I think when you develop them, when we develop them, that we need to understand in a deeper sense the pattern of development in Sonoma, where it's likely that these SB9 lots are, and that we should be specific about aspect ratios of lots, and that's their width versus their depth, and where they're located. And in particular, I think that corner lots are going to be likely candidates for SB9 developments. Because you can come in from two sides, have parking and things like that, and then there's going to be some sort of discussion or dispute about does a corner lot have two front yards or just one, and what is the front yard relative to setbacks and things like that. So I really think that we should think about the patterns that we have, apply these guidelines to the reality of our town, and develop some specifics about the geometry of lot. One of the interesting patterns in Sonoma is that when it's a four-sided block and there's homes facing on all four sides, there's backyards, and those backyards are a common open space. There's fences, there's trees, there's swing sets, there's swimming pools. But when you look across it, it's basically this beautiful open space. All you have to do is plunk in, like with Bill's diagram there in the back, 1 2-story building inserted into this open space, and what you have done is violated the visual privacy of maybe 6 or 8 neighbors with one double-story house. So if we have the capacity of saying single-story 800 square foot buildings only on this type of lot, I think that would go a long way in protecting the privacy of our neighbors. Also, what we need to understand is that the moment you put a 2-story house into a neighborhood like this, there's opportunities for them to obscure solar angles to existing panels, steal light and air from gardens. There's so many things that go along with this insertion of 2-story buildings into existing blocks that if we can quantify this, and I don't know if we have enough time, but if we can quantify this, that where the deeper into the block you go, the lower the building gets, it would be an appropriate thing to do relative to sort of preserving the harmony, I guess, of our neighborhoods, which is something very difficult to objectify. So I'm available to provide any type of professional input or opinions that the city would like in the drafting of this. I think successfully standardizing these elements will be much more important than specifying building materials, roof pitches, or wall articulations. I think that is really just the noise instead of the signal here. and that we ought to really look at things that we can quantify and stand behind in a ministerial way. So we walk away from this knowing that we've done the most that we can do to provide local control of our design destiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Chair Wellender, we do have some folks on Zoom that would like to comment.
Okay, great. Let's add them in before we allow our present people a second round.
All right. Caitlin Cornwell, go ahead and speak.
I'm Caitlin Cornwall, and I'm speaking as the project director of Sonoma Valley Collaborative. Can you understand me?
Yes.
Okay, the sound quality is very strange on my end, but I will carry on. So just to remind you all, the Sonoma Valley Collaborative is a coalition of about 30 organizations from across Sonoma Valley, and they include economic players such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Visitors Bureau and the Vintners and Growers Alliance. They include environmental organizations such as the Ecology Center, Sierra Club, and Transition Sonoma Valley. And they include a wide range of organizations that serve people, like the school district, the hospital, the health center, the Ministerial Association, several organizations that are nonprofits that provide services to children and youth. So the broadest possible array of interest groups in Sonoma Valley. And we're working on issues that affect all of those entities, and housing affordability is the one I want to talk to you about this evening. So I don't know if you all are aware, but for example, the staff of Sonoma Valley Hospital, 60% of them live outside of Sonoma Valley. Of the people who provide our fire services in Sonoma Valley, 70% of them live outside Sonoma Valley. And I don't know if you've also noticed, but the number of children in the city of Sonoma has been shrinking over the years. And all of these disturbing facts rest on the rarity of homes that people who work and live here can afford to be in, from very low income people right up through professionals. And so the Sonoma Valley Collaborative wants to urge you to make these rules foster and not inhibit the development of new homes for people who live and work in Sonoma Valley. Our community is emptying out, and you can make a difference. And so far, the proposals here seem to be consciously and purposefully designed to make it harder to make homes that people can live in. So for example, this requirement that the height of new buildings only be the same height as what was there before, that's a problem. Prohibiting flat roofs. Why are we prohibiting flat roofs? Flat roofs can be very functional and definitely cheaper. We'd agree with one of the earlier speakers about the paperwork required for older homes. That seems unnecessary, that historic piece. And then just the rules about exterior building materials just seem unnecessarily exclusive. And, technology evolves, and that's okay. Hardy board, for example, is something that we need more of around here and not less. And just in general, the whole phrase about compatible with surrounding areas is highly subjective. So just points like that really indicate that you are trying to make it harder and not easier, again, for the city of Sonoma to host in the future more homes that people who live and work here can afford to live in, and not fewer. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Caleb Weeks, you can go ahead and speak.
Planning Commissioner, Chair Wellender, Vice Chair Bennett, Commissioners and staff, my name is Callum Weeks and I am the Policy Director with Generation Housing, where we advocate for more diverse, more affordable housing. After reviewing these zoning standards, we do have some significant concerns, some of which I think Caitlin and some other folks that spoke earlier have outlined, especially in terms of the design standard. they frankly seem onerous and don't really make a lot of sense. But it's not really readily clear what was existing code and what has been changed through ad hoc recommendations. And to be perfectly honest, there didn't seem to be really any robust community engagement process. And really, how can the public meaningfully engage if we, weren't really given access to what the language, or weren't really advised in a red line version of what existed before? Kind of moving forward, some of the red flags that we were kind of noticing were related to the massing requirements. As setbacks increase as buildings get taller, and the language, what Caitlin said, units can't be taller than the existing units. It really seems like an attempt at reducing development capacity and intensity. And quite frankly, as I'm sure would be a violation of SB 330 unless you upzone commensurately elsewhere. And honestly, even if you do upzone elsewhere, these zoning standards in their current form could really be interpreted as an attempt to potentially create some sort of exclusionary standard that prevents, and again, going back to Caitlin, that, it's trying to maintain the compatibility of your neighborhood. Moving along, it's also really unclear under massing, subsection E. We notice language stating residential units shall be 800 square feet. I mean, is that a minimum, a maximum? If it's a maximum, then this would, only serve to make building multifamily units, if not at all impossible to pencil out. And again, we don't really have any context. Was this added in response to the October 20th special meeting? I know, I believe it was a planning commissioner, I don't recall who, mentioned something along the line. It certainly was mentioned earlier tonight as well. But one of the other things we did notice was the discussion around driveways, which really honestly seems kind of like a poison pill in terms of trying to restrict development. So I would leave you with this. Our concern is that there wasn't a robust community engagement process, and we would strongly encourage that these city staff return to the table, return to the drawing board, seek feedback, incorporate the input from community members to really get this right, so that we can avoid any potential legal issues down the road and really get this community moving forward in terms of developing. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and always I do appreciate your service, and I look forward. Generation Housing it looks forward to availing themselves to city staff should you have any questions or seek our guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fred Alabak, you may speak.
Good evening, Chair Wellender, Planning Commission. Happy to be here tonight. This is a fascinating topic to me of turning the subjective into objective. Just hits me right in my anthropology major philosophy interests. I'm a member of the Sonoma Valley Housing Group, and I'm speaking for them tonight, and the Sonoma Valley Housing Group is also a member of Sonoma Valley Collaborative. When I read the packet here with the design code language, it was really difficult to tell where it came from, and then from tonight, what particular zone that was in. There was really no explanation in the staff report that this was a kitchen sink approach, and as Cal mentioned, there is no red line reference what was changed, what was there before. So, given the previous Planning Commission meetings about state housing laws, I think it's reasonable for public like myself who supports SB9 to see that without knowing with a red line version that stuff could all be intentional subversion of SB9. So it was difficult to tell, and then in a conversation that I had with Christina Tierney, she clarified for me that zoning density is different than the design standards. And so when I thought about that, it seemed to me that a lot of the language in there, whether it's been changed or whether it's existing, seems to be designed to limit the space, because the zoning is just units per acre, but the design is all these features of setbacks, height, and massing, that a lot of that stuff seems to be clearly aimed at limiting the use of the space. So I would hope that, like Caitlin said, that would not be the case. So I think that it's important as we go forward with this process to state the reasons why any of this language is there. What's the justification? Mr. Bauman said that, and I wholeheartedly agree that we need to know why. Everyone has subjectivities, and so we want to get a mix of everyone's subjectivities when it gets transformed through this alchemy into objective standards. I think I see kind of a dual thrust here to foil a kind of Virginia court type of project, which I believe was Dick Cole's old house. And also I have a client who lives on, I believe it's Chase and 4th Street East, had a very tall building go right next to their backyard. They're super nice folks. They had a nice backyard picnic table, and all of a sudden now they're looking at a broadside building right next to them, and I could just see their disappointment. That it's really, some of this stuff, you do need to be sensitive to the neighbors and maybe set back the height as you go up. But SB9 to me is also designed to enable attainable housing. So there's different goal narratives here, but there's only one design code. So I'm hoping that the narrative and the goals of people who support SB9 will be heard and make it into the language, and that we can be fair to all parties, current and the future, and that we can see some advocacy for SB9 community who wants more in the discussion tonight. Let's see, I can't help but think that if this was in place and it was easier, maybe we would still have Mayor Logan Harvey, who wouldn't have moved away, have a duplex starter home. So, we want to, protect people like my client who I had there, who had the big building, and we also want to protect people who live and work here and work for their interest as well. So I would suggest a much greater transparency in this process, and going back to the drawing board and giving the rationales for all of these things so that people can see what they are. And I went through and made very detailed comments on each one of those, and so I hope that you've had a chance to read those. And a lot of my comments, without consulting with other folks, are the same, of like the flat roof, all the different step backs and details. These things seem unnecessary, or the prescriptions for window treatment. I suggested you could accent with paint if you wanted to, or the multicolored paint rules. There's a lot of things that put extra cost.
Fred, this is Ron. I want to be fair to all participants, and I'm not going to be unfair to those that are calling in on Zoom, but because I've limited 5 minutes to those that are actually here, I want to do the same for those that call in. But if you're patient enough and stay on Zoom, we will have a second round by which you can continue your valued comments to us. But I want to go ahead and keep the format consistent, whether you're on Zoom or whether you're sitting here in the room. So I hope you hang on, and we will have round two shortly.
Chair Wellender, there are no other comments on Zoom.
Now, unless Director Storr tells me I'm doing something illegal, I want to temporarily close the public portion of it, not to preclude the ability for you to have a second round, but I think it would be prudent to, in what I call a healthy exchange, to give now the commissioners 5 minutes each to share some comments either that you brought in or have heard. And so I'd like to do that. Mr. Storr, am I illegal?
Every day, sir.
Are you going to turn me in?
No, if I could just make a couple of comments based on some of the things I've heard, and then I'm sure I'll have some more afterwards, but I guess the first thing I wanted to be really clear about is that the city of, on behalf of the city of Sonoma, as your director, I support housing. Let it be known that I have an obligation as one of your stewards to make sure that we make the RENA. And these SB9 units are going to help us get to the RENA numbers. I mean, so make no doubt about it. Just like ADUs count towards our annual progress report, SB9 units will do that. So I have a vested interest on your behalf to ensure that we can kind of make our RENA over the next 8 years. That being said, I need to respond to one comment that there has been no red line because there was nothing to start with in the first place. I've had Wendy put up there, is it readable on your monitors? I'd like you to see building design number 2. And this is the subjectivity of what we're dealing with. Guidelines for residential structures. Proposed dwellings should be placed on their sites so that the most narrow dimension of the structure is parallel to the most narrow dimension of the parcel, and so that the primary entrance to the dwelling faces the public street or is accessible from a porch or other entry element which faces the street. So the subjectivity there is the should. That means it doesn't exist under SB9. It's gone. It's not measurable. I get to decide through discretionary review how we want to do that and get it approved. But the whole point of giving you something to react to is let's make it in mandatory language. And if you like it, great. If you don't, tell us to get rid of it. But this is why there is no objective standard when it comes to design. The only thing that we have in our code right now is objective information are the setbacks and things that Mr. Willis talked about. So with that, what I've heard is we do have 45 days between now and when SB9 becomes effective. And in looking at the content of being subjective versus objective, I like the notion too of having a tier 1, tier 2 approach, and that we deal with the things that Mr. Willis talked about, things that are measurable to deal with the massing that we heard, and we get that into the urgency ordinance because I think that is doable between now and I'm thinking we go towards a meeting in December on the 2nd to be able to get the information that we've heard tonight, put it into a form that we can take as an urgency ordinance, and then get that into a regular ordinance as well. As I said before, the urgency takes effect right away. It'll be December 15th. Then we can take our time on tier 2, which deals with some of these design things where we can have a more robust community input and certainly help from the architects that are here, that we can kind of then say if we like pink doors, brown doors, flat roofs, pitch roofs, whatever, because I think that is a good discussion to have. And we can certainly forward that comment, if that's the outcome tonight, to the City Council ad hoc committee that will meet next Monday. So I like that a lot, what I've heard. I just want to make sure that we're all together here, and we're not trying to be intentionally subverting information from the public. There is no red line out there. That concludes my comments, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to follow up with a quick question. If I've heard you correctly, there is a timeline for the urgency ordinance, and we understand that, and I think we all can go forward with that goal in mind to have something in place. Then if I've heard you again correctly, then we will have a period of time in which we can have a more robust, more detailed discussion. My concern is very simple. This is not the only thing that's on everybody's plate, and I don't want to mislead my fellow commissioners nor anybody from the public thinking that we'll have the time to refine, update, change, get it right, and it never happens. And that concerns me.
At the City Council, we had that discussion last night, and I'll get more into that later on in director's reports. But coming from the City Council ad hoc, we have 2 council members that were former commissioners and understand the gravity of SB9. In a perfect world, if we had nothing else to do, we'd like to get multifamily in there as well. And that can also go in with the tier 2 that I was just talking about as well, because it's the same stuff, so to speak. So I think that prioritization comes from the council. They can choose even not to do an urgency ordinance, but at this point, they have directed us to seek your input.
Thank you. Okay, I believe unless we have any other interruptions, we'll go ahead and start with our own 5-minute input. And I'll start to my far left, Mr. Barnett.
Thank you. Wendy, if you could open up the image in there that it doesn't say SB9. It's, I think it says parcel map or something like that.
They're by numbers, SB.
Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's one that has no number at all.
No.
It has, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the last number of 5 files, and then one of them is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Is it the map?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The only proviso I would talk about on this map where I'm showing the green areas. Yep.
Oh.
Okay. Where I'm showing the green areas that would qualify under SB9 for lot splits. These are the residential zones that, single-family residential zones that are otherwise not encumbered. The only thing I would add to this is that we don't have a severe fire threat zone, which would be exempted from SB9, but the hillside zone up on Brazil Street and 4th Street actually is, to me, a fire threat zone and should be rezoned in that way. For now, according to David's chart, there's like only 9 properties up there that would be affected. But nonetheless, as you can see, you know, this is only a portion of the city, and it's the portion that is not in the historic district or commercial or mixed use. And I thought that a visual representation of what we're actually talking about in terms of the dimension of this would be valuable. Okay, Wendy, if you could put up number 1, it's, no, there's another one, my number 1, that's Mr. Willer's. There you go. This is a very simple illustration of our current development pattern. These are in scale 3 7,500 square foot lots, and this is the way our current development code projects out on a schematic like this, with the appropriate combined 15-foot or setbacks on the sides, 20 in the front, and it's fairly standard. Now go to number 5, if you will. This is a projection of these same 75-foot lot in the center, developed with 2 duplexes in the rear, and in addition to the front existing house, all of which would be allowed under SB9. And you can get a sense of the change of density and the impact on, as other speakers have mentioned, the impact of 2 stories on surrounding properties. Thank you. Let me just say that on this issue of 2 stories and density, I mean, SB9, is, from my view, places handcuffs on the city. We cannot prohibit someone from building 2 duplexes. We can't force them to build 2, but we can't prohibit them from doing it. And as you could see on that 7,500 square foot lot, it was able to go in there, and I guess depending on one's feelings, it could look reasonable or not. But the fact is, as you reduce the lot size available through that subdivision for the duplexes, the lot coverage increases and increases and increases. So you can see on a lot split of a 7,500 square foot lot into 4,500 square foot and 3,000, it accommodates that duplex is 2 stories, 1 duplex above another. Now imagine that subdivided lot not being 3,000 square foot, but 1,500 square foot, and the minimum is 1,200. We can't prohibit development on anything less than 1,200. You can see that there'd be no choice but to go to 2 stories in order to conform with the law requiring a minimum of 800 square feet. So this basically means that the assumptions we've carried up until this time about FAR and lot coverage and setbacks basically have been overridden by the state of California. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I think it does bring with it certain implications. So the last thing I'll say in my 5 minutes is that I am in favor of limiting the maximum size. The state's limited the minimum size to 800. I'm in favor of limiting the maximum size to 800, and that's primarily, in my view, to reinforce affordability. Because if there's anything that will make these units more affordable, it's not having them be very large units tantamount to large single-family homes. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if I can just ask a question on.
Sure, absolutely.
Would that be single-story, 800 square footers, Larry, as far as the height?
No, I don't think there's any way to preclude 2 stories if the right to build a duplex is enshrined in SB9. It doesn't matter whether the neighbor likes it or not. I also want to add that currently any homeowner in Sonoma today, by right, can add a 2nd story. I mean, that to a certain height. So I don't really see that that's a particular concern, except insofar as neighbor reaction to it. There may be light issues, there may be shading issues, but these are all issues that come up regularly before us with neighbors who complain about a 2nd story going on a house. I don't like the idea of prohibiting people from building 2 stories, personally.
Thank you. Steve?
Well, it's hard to know where to start. I was much relieved to learn that these design standards, although they don't say they only apply to SB9, were only intended for that purpose. That said, I take great issue with about 90% of these design restrictions. A lot of people have mentioned the flat roof, the roof pitch, the type of siding you can put on or can't put on, the required brick facade, 3 kinds of paint colors. What are we thinking? And I went to school in Berkeley, spent a lot of time in that part of the Bay Area because I have kids that live in North Oakland. I walk around. There's some great looking old duplexes. They look just like the 2-story houses next door. They're very charming. They aren't regulated into the ground like this thing. They look nice. They fit in. Nobody had to tell them what siding to put on. Nobody had to tell them what facade to roof pitch. They fit. They look good. We ought to just take a deep breath and realize that not all duplexes are bad. I have to say, most of them in Sonoma are pretty darn ugly. We could do better. And I think that people would support nicer looking duplexes. So I think we need just to relax on the design restrictions. Let the design professionals do their job. They're not in the business of creating ugly buildings. They want people to like their stuff. So the other part, the various affordable housing folks who called in, I completely agree with you. That was supposed to be the point of this. And these will be restricted in size, affordable by design, because there's an 800 square foot house is only an 800 square foot house. I liked, and I can't remember which of the architects suggested this, but that we require a maximum of 800 unless the lot is so big that you get to what is equivalent to the existing floor area ratios that we would allow. And so there's no point in restricting these on larger lots, but there is a point in restricting them to 800 square feet on smaller lots, particularly because a lot of them are going to get stacked like we were just talking about. There's just not enough dirt there to put them side by side. So those are my thoughts without going through all these design standards. Just honestly, there are just way too many of them, and I don't think we need them. That's my thought.
Thank you, Steve. James?
Thank you.
I think it was clear from the design standards that we ought to, and the comments in the commission here, that we really ought to limit the size of the units to 800 square feet in general, and the exceptions being made that were commented on. I think the major issues in this that I've heard so far, not being an architect, are really the mass and the scale of these units and how they impact the adjacent properties. And Michael Ross, I thought, hit that on the nose. Trying to identify basic goals that enable development to fit the neighborhood in the context. And you mentioned only two elements, massing and scale, which I think are really the most fundamental, but you also suggested that we could do some thinking and identify more goals that would be similar to that could help us to get the big picture and not be concentrating on perhaps the minor design features, which we should leave up to the owner and his architect. I would like to hear more of that, frankly, and perhaps Michael Ross would be able to add some if we can agree on that. I also think that we should really be having substantive impact from our architectural community. We have three highly qualified people in the audience tonight. I'd like to see them be made a more consistent member of our development of this process and these documents. I think that's all I have. Thank you
very much.
Following up on Commissioner Bohar's comments, I want to thank the three of you for your input. This is really very valuable. And Bill Willers, Michael Ross, Robert Bauman, thank you. This is your time. I know that you have to work in this town, but you also put a whole lot of energy into helping us come up with these guidelines, and I so appreciate that. And I do think if there was a way that you guys wanted to participate and could help, I mean, I'd love the three of you to be on the planning commission, but if not that, if there was a way to get more of that direct to the builders, direct to the architects' input as we go through this process, that would be very valuable to me personally, because I don't have that knowledge. I'm in agreement that we should stick with the maximum 800 square foot per unit unless the lot size is large enough that you can meet the FAR restrictions. I agree that the design criteria is just too limiting, and I think we could go through and pick each one that we don't like, but I just want to scrap them all. There's just too much there that I don't like. Flat roofs can be fabulous. I don't want dormers, etc. It's hard to require people to be good neighbors, but that's what I think we're all trying to figure out is, should we allow 2 stories, placement on the lots? I think the comment that you made of the geometry of the lots, Michael, was such a really good one. I don't know how we make people be good neighbors and how we get them to engage with their neighbors on that, but that's something I'm curious if that's something that we can strive to do, because bottom line, it comes down to how the house fits with the neighbors and how the neighbors feel about it. So, and you know, that gets into privacy, light, stars, sky, the moon. We're in the valley of the moon. Like, make sure people can still see their moon. I think those things are important. The issues about affordability, I wish this was going to solve that. I don't think it will. I think that this whole proposal is taking individual ownership and allowing people to maximize their profit on it. So I do not see this as being inherently great for affordability and housing. I think by making the requirement that it does not exceed 800 square feet per unit is going to help that. But I don't think that it necessarily is going to solve our housing problems. And I'm sorry about that, but I don't think SB9 is the solution for that. I also am uncomfortable about the historic resource evaluation for a property older than 50 years. Some of those properties on the bike path neighborhood would qualify. Does that really make sense? I'm not comfortable with that, but I don't know what the right answer to that is. And just lastly, a comment about how many people that work in the fire department or the hospital live outside the area. that's just not a good measurement. I mean, firefighters can live wherever they want, right? Most of them want to live on big country properties, so they're not going to be in the city limits of Sonoma. Obviously, we do want to have as many of our local workers, our labor force, living here and working locally. SB9 is not the answer to that, but I do think that this has been worthwhile, and I think there's a couple of things that are definitely coalescing, and I'm excited about that. Thank you.
Matt?
Yeah, I'll echo Sheila's sentiment as far as the three of you gentlemen being here tonight, and frankly everybody who's contributed during the public, the open public session. It helps me. It's especially with people of your with your knowledge and with your experience. I mean, it definitely helps to inform my views on the issue. Please also to hear that there can exist some duality between standards imposed for the SB9 developments and the standards that would exist otherwise. I think that that's helpful in this case. I too am of the opinion that an 800 square foot maximum is something that we should entertain. I hate to see the kind of the regulation salad that is before us in these proposed design standards. I think it really detracts from the unique and diverse. It would detract from the unique and diverse quality that our neighborhoods have, and the talents of the architects who are doing this on a day-to-day basis. So as a general theme, I'd like to see the complexity of all this just reduced. For me, this all boils down to massing and articulation. I think that's the essence of it. I also like the idea of a tiered approach. I think that Michael's comments to that effect make a lot of sense for me. I think that was all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Bob?
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity as a commissioner to also work with staff and our community on helping guide this process. And I particularly want to thank the three-star architects from our local area to come here and help us digest this. I really appreciate it personally. And Mr. Willer's comments and his illustratives were very important in helping me understand SB a lot better. And one of the things I do want to take away from this process is with staff is to not only work on developing these regulations, but also to create a work book, so to speak, of illustratives that help guide our community and people that really truly want to include these units, give them the tools and give them the visuals to be able to make those happen. I think I probably mentioned this before. I will tell staff to maybe look at the multifamily design guidelines for the city of San Mateo, both for small development and larger. Those were prepared not only by me, but our staff as we did our general plan update, and those might also be helpful for looking at how you can approach these complex issues with neighborhood compatibility. I believe that objective standards should be included, and I think that as many people have mentioned, they should focus on bulk and privacy, because really the bottom line is people are investing their whole life savings into building a home for themselves and moving into a single family neighborhood. And additional development should occur and must occur based on the state. But protecting people's investments are very important, and creating a community that everybody feels that they are comfortable in. And so light and air and being able to have a garden and being able to have a solar panels on your roof are important. I mean, I just installed solar panels on my roof. I'd hate to see my neighbors build a two-story building next to it and block that because, I was under the impression that my rear yard, would not be built around. So I do think that I'm not going to repeat some of my other commissioners and their comments, but I believe a lower height might and should be considered for these lots. Mr. Willard talked about maybe a 25-foot height limit. I definitely believe in limiting the size of these units so they're more affordable and more attainable. And I also want to suggest possibly in terms of bulk and privacy is maybe creating a standard that limits the square footage for the second stories of these. So there's a combined limitation in terms of how much square footage can be on the second story. So that might be one way of being able to help. I do agree with staff. I do believe there should be standards for driveways. And I think I mentioned to staff that we should really consider how many curb cuts and how many entries onto the public street occur as a result of these. I think that we should be thinking about protecting on-street parking now since we have limitations on how much parking we can require. So we want to make sure our neighborhoods are livable and people have the ability to park their car. I have always disagreed with excluding counting ADUs from square footage. I think now that we've got these new Senate bills that have been requested cities deal with, we had always excluded floor area for ADUs. Well, now we've got all these new laws, so we should reconsider what we can and can't do in terms of discounting floor area, because now we're talking about intensifying neighborhoods and intensifying development. I also agree with some of the comments about limiting the number of units to simply 2 for each lot. I think also staff should be thinking about calculating or creating language to establish how you calculate height, how you establish and measure height for buildings, and also how you define and establish plate lines. I think that's very important because that will go a long way in terms of establishing bulk. I don't think that some of the language that we were looking at as part of the bulk of stuff, it helps, but it doesn't really create the objective we're trying to do, is to just provide people with guidance and trying to limit second stories. And I'm just gonna, one thing that I believe that a staff hit home on, I think, is that we should require a minimum standard for open space for each unit. I think that's very important. We live in a community that values itself on open space, and I think that we should apply some sort of standard for intensification. I also think that objectively we should look at standards that look at things such as second-story decks, exterior staircases, and rooftop decks, because those all lead to privacy issues. And I think that we should, if we're going to look at anything, we shouldn't be looking at color or windows. We should be looking at what are the things that are really going to affect people's ability to enjoy their property. And so I'll leave it at that, except there's one thing with the subdivision code, and I think I brought this up with Commissioner Barnett. We don't have very clear language on in the subdivision code regarding flag lots. And I've had a discussion with staff about this too. We have the opportunity now to refine our language with respect to flag lots, because right now when you're looking at calculating square footage for a subdivision, you can count the leg of the flag lot, which has no bearing over what results at the end of that. So if we have a minimum of 60 feet wide by 80 feet long, that's all we're going to get at the back of the lot. And most of the square footage, if you're looking at calculating density and gross acreage with respect to each lot, you're going to really have a very strange little back subdivision. So we should look at how we calculate square footage for flag lots.
Bob, hold that thought. I want to go ahead and give everybody that round at the second round, and I believe what you're just sharing is important. So
yes, and I'm done. I was
keep,
trying to throw it all out.
Keep your finger on that mark.
Okay,
right there.
and I'm done. Thanks.
Well, let me just throw out a couple of comments. First, I want to go ahead and suggest that even though we've got a draft of design detail suggestions, I think there's been consistent enough comments that we don't have to beat that horse anymore, and that staff has been given direction for the most part that we don't want that. So let's redirect our focus on other stuff that we really are concerned about. I think some very good comments have come out of this, and I'm very grateful for everybody speaking. One of the items that came out of one of the architects, and I won't say he's one of the more older architects in town, but I love that concept of the pattern. I think Sonoma has a very rich pattern if you were to kind of float above, and I think somehow as we see and try to influence SB9 and how it impacts Sonoma, it'd be nice to try to continue to respect that pattern. Again, I want to encourage where my biases are. Privacy was good, size is good, scale is good, mass is good. I'm a little concerned if our hands are going to be tied as far as controlling the setbacks for the massing, the stepping back. I really hope we can be creative and somehow come up with some control on that. I agree that we should take every advantage of refining our development code. Where it says may, we need to revisit and have it say should, assuming that we agree that the should is beneficial.
No, shall.
Well, I stand corrected again. So shall, but the intent is there. I also don't want to lose sight, and I think it's valid, that the SB9 is an opportunity for us to capture some housing units against Arena. That again is an overreach from Sacramento that I don't particularly like, but we're stuck with it. So I would like to see us do the very difficult, and that is let's get some more housing stock, but let's try to create the quality there that we can begin to again offer more people the opportunity of living in this blessed community. I thought the comment about a minimum standard open space was great. I think that really speaks to improving the quality of living here. And I think the idea of possibly creating some sort of illustrative guide that can illustrate what we've been talking about or what we end up embracing and the city council passes. I support the limiting the maximum size to 800. I also love the idea of limiting the size of the second story. I think that has validity. So I'm anxious to open up round two. Does anybody need a break before we kick into round two? Are we doing okay?
We could do a 7th-inning stretch.
We can do that as long as you'll sing. So in my last comment before I go back and open up to the public, the one comment tongue-in-cheek that I take exception to is I do think there's value in always requiring a landscape architect on a project. Now, I'm not sure why I say that, but I think we shouldn't dump that very important consultant. Anyway, tongue-in-cheek.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I'd just like to frame a direction perhaps, and then get comments from the public on that. My thought is, as Mr. Ross said, there would be no tier twos. What I'm hearing from the commission, we'll be doing a tier one, which will be then to frame some of the things that Mr. Willers and Mr. Ross spoke about and what they've heard you say. My thought is that with the holiday coming upon us and trying to get to your commission on the 9th and the council on the 15th, that might be tough. So I would suggest another meeting of your commission, But between now and that meeting, perhaps on the 2nd, that I work with the architects to come up with a proposal with whether it has illustrations or not, or a space for illustrations at some point that can get us to the December 15th council meeting for the ordinances. I think that would be good. I think between now and just after the holiday, but before the 2nd, we might be able to put something together that we can kind of frame the discussions that we're having tonight. So just kind of get some reaction to that if possible.
Great. Well, there has been some discussion, at least generated from my telephone calls, about the value of having a December 2nd meeting, and we can kind of take a vote at the end in terms of availability. But I think we all recognize that what we're doing is important, and that time is of the essence. And so I'd like to think that we can make that happen on the 2nd.
Mr. Chair, I do want to point out this is what you're doing is unprecedented. I can tell you that there's maybe 3 other jurisdictions that are thinking about it. Those there are some others in this county. I won't tell you which they are, Kodati, but they're taking the position, and I respect NOAA, by the way. They're taking it's not going to be that much of a development impact, so let's kind of get to it when we can get to it. And there's some benefit of that because you do have to put in some intense work that I've suggested tonight. So I've already been asked for our PowerPoint from just tonight from a couple of people I was on a Zoom today with. So you're going into uncharted territory.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, but I am going to take a 5-minute break, and I'll be very selfish, but we'll reconvene in 5. Too much water.
I went to the Sonoma Community Health Center, and they had walk-ins yesterday. Really? And I was dressed, like, I had this really tight turtleneck on. I wasn't expecting I was going to get it. And they said, come on in, filled out the paperwork. And I had Pfizer for my first two. So they were going down the row, like a flight attendant on a flight. Moderna or Pfizer? I'm like, I'll take Moderna, because I think Pfizer over there.
So do you think that? Yeah, no, I don't think we're going to. That's the amount of openings that
I couldn't register anywhere because I wasn't eligible yet, because the database was on.
So you just walk in.
Yeah, just walk in. As long as it's been 6 months since your last meeting.
So it's called the Sonoma Community Health.
Yeah, across from Lucky's Market.
Yeah, right across from Lucky's. You know,
Okay.
and next to Sonoma Vet?
Yes.
Yeah, just right there.
Okay.
And I don't know what their schedule is, but you can look online. They're doing a lot of pediatric vaccinations, and then they have the boosters.
We'll give them an opportunity to share again, so we'll all hear.
Yeah, I think tonight was yes, absolutely. We can't possibly do this right. That's not the limit of for people like that. Yeah, hopefully there's so many variables that we don't even know about.
I'd like to call the meeting back to order, and I believe at this time we're going to open it back up to the public. And we'd love to continue this conversation, so please step forward if you so wish.
Do you want to have a time limit?
Let's do 5 minutes again, and then if I can see that they're still passionate, we may just kind of close our eyes to the flashing red light.
That's a dangerous word, Chair.
I understand.
That's a very dangerous word. I'd like to call the attention of the commission. I don't know if you have it in front of you. Can we put this up? No? Okay. I'm going to go through my list of what I call the multi-unit objective zoning standards. And I think that-
Multi-unit?
Multi-unit objective zoning standards.
Which
and
is-
the reason that I call
okay.
them multi-unit objective zoning standards is because SB9 is basically a multi-unit piece of legislation. It's essentially allowing 2 units per parcel to be built. So if we go forward and do design guidelines for SB9 projects, it actually will cascade into the conversation of SB 35 and SB 330, because we'll be dealing with exactly the same issues. We have a context, which is the city of Sonoma, which is essentially a residential community that has edges that bounce up against multifamily and urban use. But the condition that always is the rub is that condition between the bigger versus the smaller. And I mean that in terms of scale and mass. And so I'm going to go through the list as I see it as a way of addressing SB9 in the short term until we can have a little bit more refinement. SB9 says the minimum lot size is 1,200 square feet. You essentially have to codify that. It's 1,200 square feet. So you can parcel up, you can take an existing parcel, and if it allows you to cut it down so that 40% equals 1,200 square feet, that's what someone is allowed to do. And what they're allowed to do on that 1,200 square foot parcel is build 1,600 square feet of housing, and if you demand parking, plus the parking. So imagine a 1,200 square foot parcel with 1,600 square feet of housing and 400 square feet of parking. It means a 3-story building, because you have to put the parking under the 2 stories. And SB9 says you cannot restrict it in such a way that you can't accomplish at least those 2 800 square foot units. So that's what that's what we're faced with under SB9. That's the worst scenario, but that is what we're faced with. And then as the lots get bigger and the subdivisions the parcel sizes get larger, that extreme becomes a little bit more manageable. But at 7,500 square feet, which is our minimum, it's still, as the graphic showed, it's still an issue. It still essentially forces you to 2 stories. Now, my first meeting was an affordable housing meeting 30-something years ago in this community. And it was an affordable housing meeting that we were part of a competition for affordable housing project on Spain Street. Our mentor, Bill Turnbull, won that. Those units are just over 1,000 square, or just around 1,000 square feet. So a well-done, two-story, multi-unit project that has, I believe those are all two-bedroom, two-bath, bath-and-a-half units, can be accomplished. It's not that it can't be done, but it, you know, it has to be sensitively done, and the job here is to take SB9, what SB9 gives us as a building envelope, which is that 4-foot setback sides and rear, 20 foot on the front, or whatever the base zone is, and operate within that so that we have the least amount of impact on the neighboring properties. Back to the FAR. 800 square foot unit maximum equals 1,600 square feet per parcel, or the base zone FAR, whichever is greater. That's what, once you get beyond 11,500 square feet, suddenly you get a little more square footage. But until then, which there aren't very many, until then you're 800 square feet maximum. Site coverage, the way that I kind of thought about this is, you've got the dwelling units, you've got the covered parking area, and then you've got site circulation. And what the rub comes there is that the site circulation demands a certain amount of width of driveway, turnaround space for the parking, and that roughly equals about 50% of the building area that it's serving. And so I would set that as a maximum, that you get 50% of the building area as a maximum of driveway and turnaround space, unless you can't comply with the fire code to do it. The reason why we have driveways on our lots typically that go very deep and they're required is because we have very deep lots, and the fire and emergency access is required, especially when you put a unit at the rear of it. So we need driveways that go into the properties. Setbacks, this is the biggest issue. You're required to have 4 feet on the sides, 4 feet at the rear, and you're not limited in what you can do above. There's no limitation on height in SB9. So you can set that. SB9 set 4, 4, and 4. And so if a building ends up at that 4-foot setback adjacent to an adjacent property, then its impact is much more than if it was 15 feet away. So I would propose limiting the plate line, in other words, the wall below, the floor, and the wall above, to that plate to be 18 feet. That's serviceable as a 2-story building. That's above finished grade. That allows the ground floor to be a foot off of the grade. And that's it. That's how high you get to be in a wall that's adjacent to 4-foot setback. And then you guys can decide what the maximum height is. I said 25 feet for the maximum height to allow some kind of roof structure above it, but it doesn't have to be 25. You can set it at 22 if you want, you know, and let us figure out how to do that. Let's see. And so those
excuse me, Bill, can I just ask you a question? Because
sure.
When you said the 18 feet, that was at a 4-foot setback?
When the building's at the 4-foot set between, I'll kind of clarify. The idea behind this is always related back to the base zone. There are base zoning requirements. If you're within the 4-foot required setback, minimum required setback under SB9 and the base zone, then you have to have this lower height wall. Once you move into the base zone, then you operate in the base zone. You operate as if you were doing a discretionary house in the base zone. So it allows that flexibility. It is equal in the sense that you're not restricting the buildings much more than you would if there was a typical situation, but you're addressing the idea of impact, the potential of impact on neighboring properties. And that's kind of it. That's kind of it. If you address those, you begin to address the impacts.
So at the 18 feet in that scenario, would that by necessity have to be a flat roof because you can't go above it?
No, that's where the 25-foot high.
Oh, but you're
ultimate
still
height would be.
allowing, that's just the
But
mass.
the wall plate, in other words, and this is, some people are gonna cringe at this. If you
Okay.
take 8, and if you take a foot for whatever your foundation and finish
Right.
grade is, you take 8 feet, which is not a standard today, a foot and 8 feet. It's a building standard, but it's not a standard of construction typically. That equals 18 feet. That gives you your second story plate line. Off of that,
Okay.
you work your roof within a 25-foot height. Whether it's flat, which is gonna be 18 feet high or 19 feet high, or
Well, you
sloped,
could lower it,
right?
you could lower the roof height in that, close to the property line.
Well, that's the thing. You're setting the standard that you can operate within, but those are the minimum standards. And the reason for doing that is to reduce the impact on the adjacent properties. The reason for bringing the building down when it gets within 4 feet of the property line is to reduce the impact of the building of the neighboring property. When you move away, then you let it happen the way that the base zone says it can happen. So.
Oh, Bill, I just a question with respect to, because I like this idea of a plate line. What's always been complicating with that is when you have like even a normal kind of a slope, how you calculate plate line when the house has to, say, for example, stay in a flat main foundation. The foundation
we don't
becomes,
have a lot of, we have some hillside properties. We don't have a lot of sloped properties here. And in this mine, there's a code requirement that the bottom of the wall has to be separated from the ground by a minimum of 8 inches. That's just a code requirement. So you essentially end up with a foot of space before you start the wall to the next floor. So that's where I would do it, is finished floor adjacent to building. That's where you start. From that point up is 18 feet.
okay.
And again, I think the design, I think the objective design standards are another day, and they will feed other necessity in terms of writing code and development code, changing it. So.
Bill, could you address why you think a parcel map should be submitted concurrently with an application for a 2-unit residential development?
Well, I stole that from Santa Barbara, and I think the people in Santa Barbara are on top of this. They're actively doing this. Their approach to this is exactly this approach, where they're developing their zoning standards, and they're going to go back and develop their design guideline standards. But as an emergency ordinance, they're putting in place zoning standards. One of their requirements, and I think it's to get around what is essentially a loophole in SB9. SB9 touts that SB9 is a housing bill. It's not an affordable housing bill. There's no language in SB9 about affordable housing. So I believe what Santa Barbara is attempting to do is say, okay, we're going to let you have your ministerial parcel map, but you're going to have to file a 2-unit use of that parcel so that we get guaranteed under SB9 the 2 units that it's assuming. And I think that's a valid thing.
And Bill, so for example, if you have a lot right now that's got a single family home on it, under the Santa Barbara scenario, you subdivide, you can have 1 or 2. You're saying required to have the 2.
They require the parcel map to have, at the time of submitting the parcel map, they require a housing development, a minimum of 2 units, to be shown on the parcel map.
On the resulting lot, or?
Yes, on both lots, actually.
So you actually have to have 4?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And to me, that's just, that's a way of guaranteeing the housing.
I have one more question. What would we're talking about this 800 square foot maximum, but what about the lots that already have an existing house that's greater than 800 square feet, which want to try to take advantage of the SB9 allowance of a second unit on their property? What do we do about that? They're already over the square footage.
Well, there's lots of different scenarios here. One way to deal with that, is to take that existing house and make it a duplex, or to limit the maximum amount of additional space that you can add to it to be 800 square feet or equals 1,600 square feet and turn it into a duplex. That's the intent of SB9.
Yeah.
So if we're playing by those rules, that should be our intent.
So we end up downsizing the usable living
Single-family
space on the
to
existing
create a
residence.
duplex. And essentially, that's in our code already. I can turn my through a use permit process, I can turn my single-family house into a duplex.
Bill, a follow-up question, if you don't mind. How difficult is, I'm not a designer or a building guy, how difficult is it to take that house and turn it to a duplex such that you have the ability to do conveyance?
That is simply, there are actually duplexes that exist currently in we designed a subdivision of them that exist in our community that could be subdivided into individual houses. And it's simply the fact of the way that the walls meet, that they provide fire protection to the properties, that they're common wall buildings essentially. And if you can prove that that common wall structure is there to provide separation between the two units, they can be conveyed. Property line can go down the middle of it.
Right, that was one of the issues, well, that's one of the statements in SB9 in both places.
Yeah.
That they need to be, in the subdivision piece that it can be conveyed.
And it essentially stops you from, not allowing buildings to bump up against each other, because you can bump up against each other and convey. And so they're trying to allow any kind of form to happen on the property and not make each of the duplexes an individual element, right? And that goes to Commissioner McDonald's question about condos, and that is that you can organize a duplex as a condo, because a condo is simply a description of property that can be conveyed separately. So.
I guess the better question would be, Bill, will you be available between now and December the 2nd?
Yeah, I'm happily available, actually.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll just consider you used Bob Bauman's 5 minutes too, so you're good.
Yeah, I use Robert's.
Mr. Ross, any opportunity or any interest?
Well, I definitely have the interest. What I'm interested in right now is really what our near-term goal is for this process. I believe that what we've been reviewing as the design guidelines are really just a way to start the conversation, and that they should basically be dropped. They're too fine-grained. They really aren't addressing most of the things that were discussed here this evening. And I think we ought to just commend the staff for the effort and put them aside. But a question to you, David, is the next step to go through the development code and find the aspects of the code that are directly applicable to this conversation, like, let's say, orientation to the street, the narrow aspect of the building facing the street and things like that, that say should come to some sort of agreement that is one of the goals of our guidelines, and then simply change the word to shall? Is that part of the process?
No, it was, but it isn't at the moment.
Okay.
And I can't speak for the chair, but he's been involved, as Mr. Barnett. The goal in response to SB 330 was to do just that. We started that process. And for the right or wrong reasons, we've not finished that. We are where we are today. We've got SB 9. Let's react to that. I've got no problem going through the development code. We have the money to do it through SB 2 and some other funding mechanisms, Leap Monday and Leap and Reap. So we have the money to either pay staff or have adjunct staff. But for this task, we wanted to try to get something to the council for SB 9.
Then, expanding on that question, what is the minimum we need to get to the city council to make our end game work?
Sure. Okay. Clearly, I think there's consensus, even with staff here. We need to get something to the council. And if it just means that we do the tier 1 of just getting the numbers in place for the mass and the bulk, I'd be a happy camper. Because I do know that doing the design piece of it, the design standards, that warrants a greater discussion, because in my world, I'd like to do the multifamily as well, that will address that. And then we get back on the cycle with the city council ad hoc to get into the development code and change the things that are wrong. And at that point, we will change the shells, the shoulds to the shalls, or that kind of thing, yeah.
All right. I want to acknowledge the research that Bill did. Well done, Bill. There was a lot of a deep dive into it, which I haven't had the opportunity to do. And so he really brought a lot of thought to it, and it's very valuable for this conversation. I just want to end this discussion saying that I believe that neighborhood compatibility is actually a very important component of this discussion, even though we have to objectify and standardize. And if, in an aspirational fashion, if we can keep that in the forefront and still achieve some opportunities for housing, which I believe we can, it would be very important. So thank you for this opportunity to provide feedback.
And would you also, Michael, be available to meet with Bill and myself?
Absolutely.
And Christine between now and the 2nd?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy, do we have anybody that would like
We
to
sure do. Fred Albick would like to speak. Go
I'm sorry,
ahead, Fred.
Who is it?
Fred Albick.
Oh, of course. Good.
All right, I counted Bill's time, so for parity, I know that I get at least 14 minutes here. I can see you all cringe, but I don't intend to take that much time. Got a couple of replies here to various things, and then some comments. With about the light for the gardens, that brings to mind the zucchini situation in Berkeley. So I would say to be extremely careful about that there, because if you get the zucchini symbolism going here with the height requirements, then there's probably going to be a lot of bad PR for you on that. One thing that happened during the UGB process was that it was like high density infill supposed to go to the city and not out on the edges. But then here we are in the city, and we're looking at high density infill and going up, and it's like it just doesn't seem right to have that big of a hubbub about the dense infill, and now it's like resisted. So I appreciate comments supporting two stories from Larry. I also appreciate Steve Barbosa's comments. I'd like to really suggest that among the architects that you recruit, that you give Ray Willett a call and have him get involved in this process as well, because he's an architect who might possibly advocate for some of the points of view that were brought by Caitlin and myself and Cal Weeks. So I would really appreciate some outreach to Ray and have him look at the recording of this meeting and see what kind of feedback that he can give. I think that would be important for a fair process. I also noticed that, in terms of, what SB9 is for, I mean, Sheila said it was about maximizing profit. I think there's a dual track here, and there's the Turner Center rationale that, this will free up loans that lower income people can get, and then there's the Embarcadero Institute rationale. So I think it's important to keep in mind that, people are looking at this differently, and there's a whole cohort here who kind of buys the Turner Center attainable housing part of the rationale here. And I admit, it might not always work, but that's what we're hoping for. And so I just like to not see that be discounted totally. For the historical listing, I'm uncomfortable that a big part of town is off limits to SB9 because of the historical overlay, especially if those neighborhoods were made historic and they were built from the late 1930s on, where patterns of land use from the federal housing loans created segregated neighborhoods. So I don't think it's right to sequester neighborhoods like that may have been patterned by a national segregationist policy. So I think that needs to be looked at, maybe not in this context, but in the housing element context, to see if we're talking about patterns of land use. There's one that's objective and that I think deserves to be brought out into the light. So it sounds to me like there's consensus at Deep Six, most of the design criteria, which I'm glad to see about that. And I'm just curious where we're at with the overall idea of limits in general, and what are the limits that we're talking about here? Because lay people like myself might not understand a lot of these terms, so that the affordable housing advocates can understand what the limits that are being looked at here are and how those would add up to possibly restricting space in the low-density zone areas. So, for example, I don't understand what Tier 1 and 2 is right now. So, I don't have a specific guidance. I need to study stuff like this to develop an opinion, and with the heat for the urgency ordinance on here, I feel pressure that this is being run by people who know way more than I do, but I can come up to speed and get some kind of opinion. But this is like almost too arcane for me to stay up with now. So that I would hope that the general guidance from Sonoma Valley Collaborative would be looked at, as well as the technical advice that you're getting here. Let's see, and I sort of want to note that I live in 375 square feet, and with 2 adults, and we're fine. I don't want to say that, I don't know what to say about the size of the unit, but I can at least say that 375 square feet is fine for me and my partner. Let's see. So again, I'd like to see if you guys would hopefully try and contact Ray Willett and bring him in as an architect who might triangulate on this in a little bit different way. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Anyone else?
No.
Mr. Chair, if I can just address some of the comments, and then we can perhaps move on. Hi, Fred. Good evening. The language of SB9 is not a lot of pages and text, and you can devour it, Fred, probably within about 30 minutes. Understanding it's another problem, though, trying to understand the impacts. What is clear in this, and I'll just read it: a proposed housing development containing no more than 2 residential units within a single-family residential zone shall be considered ministerially without discretionary review or a hearing if the proposed housing development meets all of the following requirements. I won't go through them all, Fred, but here's the one that you raised, and this is stating very clearly: the development is not located within a historic district or property included on the State Historic Resources Inventory as defined in SOSO of the Resource Code, or within a site that is designated or listed as a city or county landmark or historic property or district pursuant to a city or county ordinance. And I think that's what Commissioner Barnett did, is he went through that and color shaded those properties that are within historic areas. So this is not, there's no discretion for us to say, I think you can go in a historic zone. SB9 says it cannot be there. It has to be approved unless it is within one of these things, basically. That concludes my comments. And Fred, if you could contact Mr. Willett. I don't know Mr. Willett. If have him give me a call, I'd be happy to talk with him. Thank you.
Okay. Please.
Okay. Trying to understand what is the eligibility of existing non-conforming lots to be split. That's one question. And the next is, can we have specific guidelines for SB9 related to the hillside residential lots? I think there's 19 of them, and I think that's the area that's most fragile, where there's a high fire zone, erosion issue. So those are my 2 questions.
I believe in the hillside, it requires a use permit, so SB9 would not be applicable. But I'll double check on that for you just a minute. And I will find, Wendy, can you address that real quick? I'll find that, and we are precluded from making any nonconformity go away through SB9. And I'll find that text and read it in just a minute.
Okay, while we're waiting for their review, let's go ahead and begin the conversation. Larry?
Well, I think that Michael Ross brought up essentially this issue of the qualitative issues, and I'm curious and interested to see how he imagines dealing with that, because they, if you talk about neighborhood compatibility, that really, as far as I can tell as a criteria, has been taken off the table by the state and is no longer something that can be used in the evaluation of an application of any kind. How that can be solved without severe design restrictions, and I don't know how you would determine what neighborhood compatibility is if you have a variety of neighborhood styles of houses. I mean, it's one thing to have neighborhood compatibility in a tract home development because all the houses look pretty much the same. But in other parts of the city where the houses are different from one lot to the next, I don't know what compatibility even begins to mean. So I'm interested to see where that goes. My greatest concern about SB9, and I think the analysis that's been done and our planning director's estimate of how many of these may come to the fore, is real. I think it's with the cost of construction today, even an 800 square foot unit is going to cost $800,000 or $1 million to build, with all the fees and all the construction and materials. I mean, this is not something that's going to be done casually by people who live here. I think the risk and my concern about this measure is that basically opens the door to corporate exploitation, and they're going to go after the low-hanging fruit, which are the lower-priced properties in the very part of town and occupied by the very people who are here because those areas are lower in price in terms of rent and sales price. And I'm not the only person who has come to this conclusion. I've been reading analyses of SB9, one by the former director of legislation, or the manager of legislation evaluation for the California League of Cities, who came to exactly the same conclusion, that if anything is vulnerable because of SB9, it's going to be the lower income, lower priced properties that are going to be exploited. It's always my worry. It's been my worry in this town for 30 years. I keep looking at matters of exploitation, and I do my best to try to think it through and figure out how to prevent it, but it's becoming more and more difficult, and in a case like this, I think it's going to be very difficult because the law is on the side of the corporate exploiters. I want to respond to one thing I heard about minimum open space. I think open space is great. I love the idea of open space. You won't have minimum open space on a 1,200 or a 1,500 and 1,800 square foot lot with two 800 square foot units on it. There's not going to be much room for open space. And so I like the idea, but it's not, I don't think you can mandate open space when you run up against essentially the combination of the size limits and the entitlements that are given under SB9. The smaller the lot, the less space there's going to be for anything if you build minimum 800 square foot units. It's just the reality of what we're up against. And so we can talk about open space, but I don't see how you mandate something like that without getting to a very complex formula. And maybe that's a tier 2 discussion of it. So I like the approach that I'm hearing from the staff in terms of dealing with matters of mass and coverage and lot lines and so forth, and setbacks as best we can, and then getting to refinements later on in the process in a tier 2 process. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I can respond to Commissioner O'Neill's.
Sure.
So in the Subdivision Map Act, it's been modified now to say, relevant to SB9, A local agency shall not require as a condition for ministerial approval of a parcel map application for the creation of an urban lot split, the correction of non-conforming zoning conditions. Pretty clear. Sorry.
Thank you.
Steve, some thoughts?
No, I don't really have anything additional to add at this point. I think this is headed in the right direction, and look forward to coming back to this on December 2nd.
Thank you, Steve. Sheila?
Good.
Nothing further.
I
Don't
just-
disappoint me, Bob.
I have just a comment about affordability and how we move forward. I hope that this Senate bill and the housing that's created gives the city an opportunity to look at creating affordability, looking at our new revised housing element, and hopefully looking at a way for our city and possibly even the county to look at creating funding for programs that allow the city to either purchase these units that might be created and to be able to create a subsidized system where people are able to access these units. And I know that it sounds really revolutionary, and some people look at me very odd, but I believe that the onus of creating affordability is on us, the people that live in Sonoma, not the developers. And I believe that if everybody in the city really truly wants to build affordable housing, that we should be looking at creating some sort of tax increment financing in certain areas, like we used to do as part of our redevelopment agencies, and create incentive zones that allow for the city to collect taxes to fund affordable housing, and also even tax its own citizens as part of a property tax to create affordable housing that would be able to go into a fund and to be able to purchase properties like this to be able to ensure that they're affordable. So when I hear people talking about we need to build affordable housing, we got to get housing that's affordable, I think it's our responsibility. We can't rely on developers to do that. And so I hope Senate Bill 9 gives us the opportunity to work on a program that we might be able to get access to these units that are built, and to create a program to allow for people to get into houses like this. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can, a thought occurred to me to help reinforce the direction that your commission is going, and that is that, and for Fred's sake, the Tier 1, Fred, that we were talking about was dealing with some of the things that you heard from the architects tonight. The Tier 2 was getting into the substance of pink doors, green doors, dormers, and the like at a later point in time, if we choose to go there. But in response to the direction we're going, HCD will be coming out with guidance. I meant to mention this in my presentation, but that won't be available until after the first of the year. So I think this approach, going in with the Tier 1, so to speak, that will give us some breathing room to figure out what HCD is going to be coming out with guidance, or technical assistance, if you will, which they do, usually after the fact.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep my round 2 comments very short. First, I want to thank you guys. I thought we had a good discussion, including the audience. I think what's evident, we may not see things all alike, but what I do see is a commonality that we care about this town. So that's good, and I thank you. The one thing I'd like to leave with, and it's something that we can discuss the next time around, but with the comment about the value or the inability to create open space is, I'd like to have some discussion next time about where we stand on parking. And recognizing that when you do on-site parking, you take up space. And unfortunately, sometimes that space is not open. Well, it is open space. I mean, the circulation route to the garage or to the carport. So again, the question I just want to throw out for cogitation and further discussion is, can we revisit what our expectations are for the parking requirement? 1 car per unit, where does that, where might that go? And I certainly don't have a recommendation at this point, but I again go back and think that one of the valuable assets that we really don't want to lose is the ability to create open space in some fashion. So with that, if I have the power, I'll do it. If not, you can correct me. I want to close this and then move on to our last few items here in terms of items for discussion. So is everybody okay with that? Yes. Okay. So we're up to issues update. Wendy, would you give David his 5 minutes and no more?
All right, I'm setting the timer.
I'll speak really slowly. So a couple of things happened this week I think will be of interest to your commission. On Tuesday afternoon, I have not yet heard it. I've heard a narrative or a summary of what happened, but the County of Sonoma Board of Supervisors convened a hearing on Picasso projects, or what's the word I'm looking for, split ownerships, multi-ownerships. I've got the wording wrong, but fractional, thank you. I haven't heard it, but the point there was not to grouse about the fact that it can be done. It's what is it about the fractional ownership method of residential living creates an inconsistency with a residential neighborhood. And I don't know if that particular question was addressed. I can imagine that there'd be a lot of concern about just the concept of fractional ownership. So that was Tuesday afternoon. I'll try to report back on that at your next hearing. But that is that concern is still out there, and staff is monitoring it. On Wednesday of this week, we had a city council meeting, and at that city council meeting, that will be yesterday. The days are fusing together now. The city council did a couple of things with respect to planning issues. Number one is that they did approve by resolution a new set of administrative regulations and application procedures and guidelines for a second cannabis retail storefront, and directed staff to return within 6 months after Spark has been in operation to receive a few things. Number one is an analysis or a description of the rollout, if you will, of the community benefits. As you recall, through the cannabis process there, each applicant was to provide a list of ways in which they could help the community, and then also to review any potential impacts that were not, that have come up, arisen outside of the use permit conditions of approval that we discussed. There was also part of that resolution some new fees for applications, but the direction was to come back after 6 months of Spark having provided us with some of their tax information as well. The second thing at the council meeting last night was that the council authorized a consultant. They adopted a resolution to hire a consultant for the Jasper process, the hillside development projects. The 3 projects have not been submitted to us yet, but the council selected AECOM to do that analysis when those applications are presented to the staff. Concurrently with our council meeting, there was a joint, and I'm going to get this wrong, it's a Springs MAC and a Sonoma Valley Citizens Advisory Committee meeting regarding the Sonoma Development Center project, the specific plan, where they discussed the 3 alternatives. As we speak, I'm in conversation with the county to have them come and do a presentation before the city council. We hope to have that at their city council's December 1st meeting. So if you wanted to watch that at home, you can do that, or come and be in attendance. That'd be something that we can do. That concludes my 5 minutes, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Comments from my fellow commissioners?
I have one comment or request. For too long, the microphone at the public spot for speaking has been inadequate. It may be a function of my getting old, or it's to my left, but I have difficulty hearing some of these folks speaking. And I don't have difficulty when I hear any of you speak into the microphones. So I don't know who staff needs to speak with about getting this improved, but I think it's unfair to the public, and it's unfair to the people who sit up here to have to strain to be heard.
Yes.
I have a comment.
Please.
Commissioner McDonald made some comments, and it got me thinking. The city of Sonoma does not have a transfer tax. And I,
55 cents a thousand.
on commercial,
No, on all properties.
not on residential.
Not on residential?
No.
Make sure you use your microphone, please.
Yeah, Sheila's
Not
correct.
on residential. And I was just thinking about that because some of our neighboring cities like Petaluma have $2 and Cotati is $1.90. And if we're looking for a way to generate some revenue towards affordable housing, I'm just want to put it out there as something maybe we should be thinking about.
Yes.
It may require becoming a charter law city rather than a general law city.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments? Well, my final comment is just to wish everybody a very blessed Thanksgiving. Thank you very much, and I'm trusting that we're okay for December 2nd for our next gathering.
Would everybody like that at 4 o'clock? That was a bad joke.
Yes, that was a bad joke.
Sorry. 6 o'clock it is. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, and good job. Thank you.
No, just commercial. But there's,
It depends on how they set it up, whether they do commercial and residential.
like, San Francisco,
City of Sonoma has no residential transportation. The county does, it's $1.10 per
you know, like San Francisco funds part of its affordable housing through the transfer tax.
What's the rate?